Welcome to Tales by Imon. Tonight, we begin a new journey into the unknown, a story of signals, secrets, and the terrifying realization that we are never truly alone. This is The Code Hidden in the White Noise. The world Liam Carter knew was made of data. Not the clean, elegant datasets they showed in corporate brochures, but the real stuff, messy, chaotic, and drowning in noise. His job at Data Stream Solutions in Seattle was essentially that of a digital janitor. He swept the floors of corrupted files, scrubbed the grime from poorly logged audio feeds, and filtered the static from vast oceans of information. Also, their clients could see the pristine, valuable pearls of data hidden beneath. It was tedious, methodical work, and most days, it was mind-numbingly boring. But Liam had a peculiar knack for it. He could see patterns where others saw only chaos. His cubicle on the 17th floor was an island in a sea of identical gray workspaces. The only personal touches were a small, resilient succulent named Spike and a framed photo of the Cascade Mountains, a reminder of a world that existed beyond the humming servers and the perpetual twilight of the office. The air smelled of recycled oxygen, stale coffee, and the faint, electric tang of overworked processors. Outside his window, a classic Seattle drizzle painted shimmering, abstract trails on the glass. Today's task was a particularly grimy one. A client, a massive telecommunications conglomerate, had provided petabytes of atmospheric signal recordings. They were trying to isolate and eliminate a new form of signal interference that was plaguing their satellite communications. Liam's job was to analyze the white noise, the background static, and create a filter algorithm to scrub it clean. For 3 days, he'd been swimming in that static, his headphones filled with the gentle, unending shhhhh of the universe's background radiation mixed with terrestrial interference. He was working on a segment logged at 3:17 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. It was the dead of night, a time when the airwaves should be at their quietest. He had the data visualized on his central monitor through a chronospectral analyzer, a waterfall of cascading colors representing frequencies over time. Blue was silence. Greens and yellows were low-level noise. Reds and whites were powerful signals. As expected, the display was a sea of placid, shifting blues and greens. It was the visual equivalent of the sound in his ears, random, meaningless, and perfectly normal. He stretched his arms over his head, his knuckles popping in the quiet hum of the office. He was about to mark the segment as clean baseline and move on when something caught his eye. A flicker. In the deep blue of Channel 7, a sliver of the spectrum that should have been utterly silent, he saw a faint, rhythmic pulse of green. It was so subtle, he almost dismissed it as a visual glitch on his monitor. He leaned closer, his nose nearly touching the screen. He rewound the data stream by 60 seconds and played it again, this time isolating Channel 7. The hiss in his headphones remained unchanged, a smooth, even carpet of sound. But on the screen, the pattern repeated. A tiny, almost imperceptible pulse. Not a spike, not a burst of energy, but a structured repeating sequence of slightly less random noise. It was like finding a single, perfectly rhyming line of poetry in a book filled with random letters. Curiosity, the one instinct that had survived years of corporate monotony, sparked within him. He bypassed the standard analysis suite and loaded his own custom diagnostic tools. He started with a fractal dimension analysis, a way to measure the complexity of a data stream. True white noise should have a high fractal dimension, it's jagged and unpredictable. He ran the analysis on the surrounding channels, and the results came back as expected, a value hovering around 1.9. Chaotic. Then, he ran the analysis on the anomaly in Channel 7. He watched as the progress bar crawled across the screen. The machine whirred, its fans spinning a little faster. The result appeared, and Liam felt a cold prickle on the back of his neck. 1.3. It was impossible. A value of 1.3 didn't mean it was less noisy, it meant the noise itself had a hidden order. It was structured, patterned, and deliberate. It was something masquerading as randomness. His heart started beating a little faster. This wasn't equipment malfunction. A glitch would be a spike, a burst of red on the screen. This was subtle. This was intelligent. He rerouted the isolated signal through a phase shift amplification matrix, a technique used to pull coherent data out of seemingly random signals. It was like adjusting the focus on a microscope, hoping to bring a hidden world into view. He tweaked the variables, his fingers flying across the keyboard. He adjusted the temporal alignment, then the phase coherence. For a moment, nothing happened. The screen remained a waterfall of gentle green pulses. He was about to give up, to chalk it up to a lack of sleep, when he hit the perfect combination. The screen flickered. The waterfall display dissolved and was replaced by something else entirely. It was a tight, repeating block of binary code. A dense, intricate pattern of ones and zeros, marching across his screen in perfect, disciplined rows. It wasn't just a signal, it was data. A message. Liam yanked his headphones off, the sudden silence of the office feeling louder than the static had been. He looked around. His boss, Mr. Thompson, was in a meeting. His colleagues were lost in their own worlds of data. No one had noticed. His discovery was his alone, a secret whispered from the heart of the static. He felt a sudden, irrational jolt of fear. Who would hide a message in atmospheric white noise? And why? This was data that was designed to be ignored, to be filtered out and thrown away. It was the perfect hiding place. His hands trembled slightly as he initiated a copy command. He had to save this. He had to study it. As the file transfer began, the lights above his cubicle flickered once, then twice. His primary monitor went black for a full second before rebooting, the DataStream Solutions logo appearing with a cheerful chime that sounded sinister in the charged silence. When the screen came back on, the spectral analyzer software was closed. The temporary file he was copying from was gone. Vanished, as if it had never existed. A cold dread washed over him. It wasn't a system crash. System crashes were messy. They left error logs, corrupted fragments. This was clean. It was a surgical removal. But he had been fast. Before the system blinked, a small portion of the data, just the first few kilobytes, had successfully copied to his personal, encrypted drive. It was a tiny fragment, less than 1,000th of the whole message, but it was something. It was proof. With his heart pounding against his ribs, he opened the fragment in a simple text decoder. It was mostly gibberish, a chaotic stream of characters as the decoder struggled to make sense of the binary. But then, nestled within the gibberish, a single clear sequence of ASCII characters resolved itself. It wasn't a complex message or a set of coordinates. It was just 2 words, a simple phrase that made the blood in his veins run cold. They listen. The 2 words burned on the screen, an impossible message from an impossible source. They listen. Liam's blood ran cold. It wasn't a threat, it was a statement of fact. A confirmation of a fear he hadn't even known he had. His first instinct was to slam his laptop shut, to pretend he'd never seen it. But he knew it was too late. You can't unsee something like that. You can't unknow it. The knowledge was now a part of him, a parasitic bit of data that had embedded itself in his own mind. His gaze darted around the office. Everything looked the same, yet everything was different. The low, steady hum of the server room now sounded like a deep, conspiratorial whisper. The blinking network activity lights on the routers were no longer random flickers. They were watchful eyes, recording his every move. Mr. Thompson was still in his glass-walled office, laughing on a conference call. The sound was inaudible, but his smile, once seen as merely corporate, now seemed predatory. Was he one of them? Who were they? Panic was a rising tide, threatening to drown his rational mind. He fought it down, forcing himself to breathe. He was a data analyst. Data was logical. Problems had solutions. He had to treat this as just another problem. Step 1. Damage control. With methodical, deliberate movements, he began to scrub his digital footprint from the last hour. He cleared his command history, deleted the temporary logs from his analysis software, and purged the system's cache. He even ran a memory defragmentation utility, a pointless action for a modern solid-state drive, but it felt proactive. He had to make the system event, the screen flicker, the software crash, look like a random, run-of-the-mill hardware glitch. He wrote a brief entry into his work log, encountered critical memory allocation error at 1542. Forced reboot. No data loss on primary project files. It was a plausible lie. A digital alibi. He ejected the encrypted thumb drive containing the precious fragment of code and slipped it into his pocket. The tiny piece of plastic and metal felt impossibly heavy, like it contained the weight of the world. He leaned back in his chair, trying to regulate his breathing and appear casual, just another employee finishing up his day. He stared at the atmospheric noise data on his screen, the same sea of blue and green he'd been looking at before. But now, he knew what was hiding in its depths. He wasn't looking at noise anymore. He was looking at the most sophisticated camouflage he had ever seen. For the next hour, he pretended to work. He ran mundane diagnostics, answered a few emails, and tidied his desktop icons. But his mind was racing. Who would have the resources to embed a high-density data stream into background radiation and, more terrifyingly, have the ability to monitor the very systems analyzing it? It wasn't a rival corporation. This was beyond corporate espionage. This felt bigger, governmental, or something else entirely. The words, "they listen," echoed in his head. They had to mean that his actions, his very discovery, had been observed in real time. The system wipe wasn't a booby trap in the data, it was a reaction. Someone, or something, had been alerted the moment he'd focused his digital microscope on the right spot. He felt like a biologist who, after discovering a new microbe, realized the microbe was staring right back. He knew he was out of his depth. The fragment of code in his pocket was a puzzle box, and he didn't have the key. His own decryption tools were useless against it, barely able to translate that one intelligible phrase. He needed help. But who could he possibly trust? Telling his boss was out of the question. Going to the authorities was equally risky. He had no proof beyond a tiny file and a story that sounded like paranoid delusion. They'd think he was crazy. Or worse, what if they were the authorities? His thoughts circled, and one name kept surfacing. Dr. Evelyn Reed. Dr. Reed wasn't technically an employee of DataStream anymore. She was a legend, a semi-retired fellow who had written the foundational code for half the analysis software the industry used. She was brilliant, fiercely private, and paranoid about corporate and government oversight long before it was fashionable. She had left the company 5 years ago, disgusted by what she called the commodification of everything. Now she consulted on only the most esoteric projects, the ones that piqued her intellectual curiosity. Liam had worked with her once, years ago, on a project involving signal compression. She had been sharp, demanding, and had seen through his half-baked theories in seconds, but she had also been fair. More importantly, she operated completely off the company grid. He knew he couldn't contact her through any official channels. His company email was certainly monitored. His phone, too, was a liability. He had to assume everything he did digitally was being watched. Liam glanced at the clock. 5:15 p.m. The office was starting to empty out. He packed his bag, his movements slow and measured. He shut down his terminal, the screen going black with a soft sigh. As he stood up, he caught his reflection in the dark monitor. He looked pale, his eyes wide. He looked like a man who had seen a ghost. He walked out of the office, nodding to the security guard at the front desk. The cold, damp Seattle air was a shock after the recycled atmosphere of the building. Rain fell in a fine mist, blurring the neon signs of the city into watercolor streaks. Every passing car, every person talking on their phone, every security camera mounted on a building felt like a potential threat. The paranoia was no longer a feeling, it was a lens through which he now saw the world. He walked for 3 blocks, letting the rain soak into his jacket, before ducking into a small, dingy electronics store. The air inside was thick with the smell of ozone and solder. "I need a burner," he said to the man behind the counter, who barely looked up from his phone. "Prepaid. Cash." Minutes later, he was back on the street, a small, anonymous cardboard box in his hand. He found a secluded bench in a small city park, surrounded by damp, drooping trees. He took the encrypted drive from his pocket and held it in one hand, the new, untraceable phone in the other. He knew Dr. Reed's public academic email address by heart. It was a long shot, but he suspected she monitored it from a secure terminal of her own design. He powered on the burner phone, its cheap screen glowing in the gray twilight. He typed a short, cryptic email, one that wouldn't trigger any keyword filters. Subject: Old compression problem. Dr. Reed. It's Liam Carter. I was an analyst on the T-800 project with you. I've run into a fractal dimension anomaly I can't resolve. It looks like noise, but it's not. It's too ordered. I thought of you. I need a second opinion from someone who still believes in ghosts in the machine. He hesitated for a moment, his thumb hovering over the send button. This was the point of no return. Once he sent this, he was pulling someone else into his nightmare. But the alternative, facing this alone, was unthinkable. He took a deep breath and pressed send. The message was gone, fired into the ether. Now, all he could do was wait, and hope he hadn't just made the biggest mistake of his life. The email was sent. There was no unsending it. Liam sat on the cold, damp park bench as the city lights began to bleed into the evening mist, feeling the irrevocable weight of his decision. He had cast a message in a bottle into a digital ocean, hoping a specific, reclusive castaway would find it. Now, the waiting began, and it was a unique form of torture. Every 5 minutes, he checked the burner phone screen, hoping for a reply, yet dreading what it might say. Or worse, what if there was no reply at all? What if Dr. Reed thought his email was spam, or a prank, or simply not interesting enough to warrant her attention? He couldn't go home. The thought of his quiet, familiar apartment, a place he once considered a sanctuary, now felt like stepping into a cage. If they could scrub his terminal at the office, they could certainly be waiting for him at home. His entire life, every digital device, every smart appliance, suddenly felt compromised, a network of spies he had willingly installed himself. With a growing sense of dread, he walked the rain-slicked streets until he found what he was looking for, a cheap, run-down motel on the edge of the industrial district, the kind with a flickering neon sign that read "Vacancy" and promised no questions asked. He paid in cash for one night, using the fake name Mark Jensen. The room smelled of disinfectant and damp carpet. The single window looked out onto a brick wall. It was perfect. It was anonymous. Inside, he locked the deadbolt and wedged a chair under the doorknob. He sat on the edge of the stiff bed, the burner phone in one hand, the encrypted drive in the other. He had to assume his original drive, the one with the fragment, could be tracked. Dr. Reed's paranoia was contagious, and Liam was a fast learner. He needed a copy. He powered up the burner phone, carefully transferring the tiny, encrypted file into its meager internal storage. Then he took the thumb drive, wrapped it in a piece of tissue, and hid it inside the ventilation shaft cover, which he'd unscrewed with a dime from his pocket. It was a flimsy precaution, but it was all he had. Sleep was impossible. Every creak of the old building, every siren in the distance, sent a jolt of adrenaline through him. He replayed the discovery in his mind, the binary code appearing from the static, the system wipe, the two chilling words. He was an analyst, a man who lived by logic and verifiable facts. But nothing about this was logical. It felt like he had peeled back a layer of reality and found something ancient and vast staring back at him. Just after 2 a.m., when the city had finally fallen into a deep, watery slumber, the burner phone vibrated. The sudden, sharp buzz in the silent room made him jump. It was a text message from an anonymous number. There were no words, just a web link and a short string of characters. Query, T-800. His heart hammered in his chest. T-800. That was the project name he'd mentioned in his email, a project only a handful of people would remember. This was her. This was the reply. He typed the link into the phone's cheap browser. It led to the classified section of an obscure online forum for amateur radio enthusiasts. It was a wall of text, people selling old vacuum tubes and antenna coils. It was meaningless noise, just like the data he'd been analyzing. But he knew there was a signal hidden within it. He used the search function on the page and entered the query from the text, T-800. One listing was highlighted. It was an ad for a vintage spiral antenna. The description was brief and strange. Seeking buyer for unique reception device. Perfect for capturing quiet conversations. The spiral speaks volumes, if you know how to listen. Available for viewing at the Central Library, tomorrow at 11 a.m. sharp. 3rd floor, West Wing, near Plato. Come alone. No electronics. Show your interest by carrying a green-spined book. Liam read the message 3 times. It was a masterpiece of paranoia. The Seattle Central Library. It was public, crowded, yet filled with quiet corners. The spiral speaks had to be a reference to the library's iconic, spiraling architecture and its function as a house of knowledge. 3rd floor, West Wing, near Plato, was the philosophy section. No electronics meant she wouldn't risk being tracked or recorded. The green-spined book was a recognition signal, a way for her to identify him without approaching the wrong person. A wave of relief washed over him, quickly followed by a fresh spike of anxiety. This was happening. He wasn't just a man in a motel room with a crazy theory anymore. He had an appointment. The next morning, Liam bought a cheap paperback with a green cover from a used bookstore. He left the burner phone and his wallet in the motel room, taking only the cash he needed for the bus and the new, copied thumb drive, which he tucked into his shoe. Walking into the Seattle Central Library felt like crossing into another world. The building was a stunning, angular construction of glass and steel, a cathedral dedicated to information. He found the philosophy section on the 3rd floor. It was quiet, almost deserted. Sunlight, weak and gray, filtered through the massive glass walls, illuminating dust motes dancing in the air. He stood near the shelves dedicated to ancient Greek philosophy, the names of Plato and Aristotle staring out at him. He pulled the green-spined book from his coat pocket and held it loosely in his left hand, just as instructed. He waited. 10:55. 10:59. The silence of the library was absolute, punctuated only by the distant cough of a student and the soft rustle of turning pages. Liam's eyes scanned the aisles, his nerves stretched taut. Was she watching him right now, gauging if he had been followed? Exactly at 11 o'clock, he heard a soft footstep behind him. The problem with Plato, a low, calm voice said, is that he believed the world of perfect forms was the true reality. He never appreciated the beauty of the shadows on the cave wall. Liam turned. Standing there was a woman in her late 60s, with sharp, intelligent eyes that missed nothing. She had short, graying hair and wore a simple, functional raincoat. It was Dr. Evelyn Reed. She looked older than he remembered, but her gaze was just as piercing, just as intense. She wasn't looking at his face. She was looking past him, scanning the entire floor with a practiced, sweeping glance. "He was afraid of the noise," Liam replied, his voice barely a whisper. He didn't realize the most important messages are hidden there. Her eyes finally met his. A flicker of something, not quite a smile, but a glint of acknowledgement, appeared. "Show me the shadow you found, Mr. Carter." Evelyn Reed's eyes held his for a moment longer, her expression unreadable. Then, with a slight nod, she turned and began walking down the aisle, not waiting to see if he would follow. Liam understood. This was not a conversation for a public space. He fell into step several paces behind her, the green-spined book still clutched in his hand like a useless shield. She led him through the library's maze of shelves and reading nooks with a quiet, efficient confidence. They didn't speak. Her instructions were communicated through subtle gestures, a glance telling him to wait as she scanned a hallway, a slight turn of her head indicating their path. They exited the library through a side door and stepped back into the gray, drizzling afternoon. "We'll walk," she said, her voice low. "No taxis, no ride shares. Stay on the opposite side of the street. If you see anyone paying us too much attention, turn down the next side street and don't look back. I'll do the same. We'll meet at the coffee shop at the corner of Pike and 8th in 30 minutes. If one of us isn't there, the other leaves." The instructions were cold, precise, and terrifying. This was her world, Liam realized, a world of constant vigilance. He nodded, and she was gone, disappearing into the lunchtime crowd. He crossed the street as instructed and began the tense, parallel walk. He was hyper-aware of everyone around him, the businessman talking on his phone, the student with a backpack, the tourist staring at a map. Any one of them could be an observer. He felt exposed, his every step monitored. It was a relief when he finally saw the designated coffee shop and, through the window, the back of Evelyn's graying head. She was already sitting in a booth, a steaming mug in front of her. When he sat down, she didn't acknowledge him for a full minute, her eyes fixed on the street outside. Finally, she seemed satisfied. "The drive," she said, her voice barely a whisper. Liam reached down, pretending to tie his shoe. His fingers fumbled with the small drive, his hands slick with a nervous sweat. He slipped it out and cupped it in his palm. She placed a folded napkin on the table. "Put it inside. Then leave the napkin when we go." He did as he was told. They sat in silence for another 10 minutes, sipping their coffee, looking like any two strangers sharing a table. Then Evelyn stood up. "Let's go." She led him this time on a winding path through the city's older quarter, to a neighborhood of brick warehouses and forgotten storefronts. She stopped in front of a heavy steel door with no markings, producing an old-fashioned physical key to unlock it. The inside was dark and smelled of dust and cold concrete. She locked the door behind them, the sound of the heavy bolt sliding home echoing in the space. Flicking a switch, she revealed not a warehouse, but a meticulously organized laboratory. It was a technomancer's cave. Wires ran in neat bundles along the ceiling, connecting racks of custom-built servers stripped of their cases. Oscilloscopes displayed silent, hypnotic green waves. In the center of the room, on a heavy wooden workbench, sat a single, isolated computer tower and monitor. It was an older model, its beige case a relic from another era. "My workshop," she said, a hint of pride in her voice. "The entire room is a Faraday cage. No signals get in or out. The machine on the bench is air-gapped. It has never touched a network, and it never will. It's the only place I'd trust to look at what you've brought me." She retrieved the thumb drive from the napkin and held it up to the light. "You said on your first pass, the signal's fractal dimension was 1.3. Impossibly ordered." "Yes," Liam said, watching her every move. "And when I focused the phase shift analysis, it resolved into dense binary." She nodded, her expression grim. She walked to the air-gapped computer and inserted the drive. Her fingers moved with a surgeon's precision across the keyboard, typing lines of code into a stark, black and white command line interface. For several minutes, the only sound was the clicking of the keys and the low hum of the equipment. Liam stood by, feeling like an apprentice watching a master at work. "All right," she said, leaning closer to the screen. "Your fragment is small, but the density is incredible. The compression is unlike anything I've ever seen." She ran another diagnostic. A complex, multicolored graph bloomed on the screen. It's not just one layer of encryption. It's nested. Dozens of layers, like a digital matryoshka doll. Whoever built this didn't just want to hide it, they wanted it to be fundamentally unreadable. "But I was able to read a part of it," Liam insisted. It said, "They listened." Exactly, Evelyn said, her eyes gleaming with intense focus. That wasn't part of the core message. It was in the header data. A wrapper. Think of it as a warning. Contents under pressure label on a tank of volatile chemicals. It's a tripwire, meant for whoever is clever or foolish enough to get this far. She isolated the fragment and ran it through a proprietary decryption algorithm she had clearly written herself. The screen filled with scrolling hexadecimal code. It was mostly gibberish, but Evelyn's eyes scanned it, recognizing patterns he couldn't see. "This isn't just a message, Liam," she said, her voice dropping. "Passive data doesn't behave this way. See this recursive loop here? And this checksum validation routine? This is executable code. It's a program." Liam felt a fresh chill. A program? What does it do? Evelyn was silent for a long moment, her gaze locked on the screen. "I don't know for sure. It's too fragmented. But based on the structure, it seems to be a key. A key that's designed to actively seek a lock. It's broadcasting a specific, infinitesimally small signature. It's sending out a ping." She turned in her chair to face him, and for the first time, he saw a flicker of genuine alarm in her eyes. When your system at work was wiped, they weren't just covering their tracks. They were trying to stop this fragment from getting out and doing exactly what it's doing right now on this drive. "What is it doing?" Liam asked, his throat dry. "It's announcing itself," Evelyn said, her voice grave. "The code isn't just a message hidden in the noise. It's a listening post. And by finding it, Mr. Carter, you've just switched it on." The words hung in the air of the Faraday cage, colder and heavier than the concrete walls around them. "You've just switched it on." Liam stared at Evelyn, his mind struggling to process the terrifying implication. He felt a phantom vibration in his pocket, as if the thumb drive he'd hidden in the motel was somehow burning a hole through space and time, broadcasting his existence to the unseen watchers. "Switched what on?" he asked, his voice tight. "It's a fragment of a file on a thumb drive. What can it possibly be doing?" "You're thinking of it in conventional terms," Evelyn countered, turning back to her screen. Her face was illuminated by the scrolling lines of code, giving her an almost spectral appearance. "You think of a program as something that runs on a computer. This thing is different. It's not designed to run on a processor, it's designed to resonate. The code itself has a quantum signature. By isolating it, by copying it, you've given that signature a distinct location. Before, it was a whisper lost in a hurricane of atmospheric noise. Now, it's a lone, pure note ringing in a silent room. And whatever broadcast the original signal is almost certainly designed to listen for that echo." Liam sank onto a nearby stool, the strength gone from his legs. "So, I'm a beacon. They're looking for me right now." "It's the most logical conclusion," Evelyn said, her tone devoid of comfort, focused only on the facts. "Which brings us to the immediate problem. What do we do with this?" She gestured to the screen, where the alien code was still displayed. "My first instinct, my every self-preservation instinct, tells me to wipe this drive, melt it down, and throw the slag in the deepest part of Puget Sound." "We can't," Liam said immediately, the words surprising him with their own conviction. "We can't destroy it. Don't you see? This could be the most important discovery in human history. We can't just throw it away because we're scared." Evelyn looked at him, a long, appraising stare. "That is precisely the kind of noble sentiment that gets people like you killed, Mr. Carter. But," she sighed, a small, weary sound, "it's the same sentiment that makes it impossible for me to destroy it either. The scientist in me is screaming louder than the survivalist." She turned back to her work, her focus absolute. "If we're going to analyze this, we need more than a fragment. We need the whole symphony, not just a single note. Your original discovery, you said it was in a data set from a telecom client at DataStream." "Yes," Liam confirmed. "Atmospheric signal recordings. Petabytes of it. The anomaly was in a quiet window, logged at 3:17 a.m. Pacific time. We need that source file," she stated simply. "This fragment is the key, but the original complete signal is the lock. Inside that larger file, there might be context, clues to the origin, or the rest of the message. This tiny piece is screaming, 'I'm here,' but the full signal might tell us who they are." A new wave of despair hit Liam. "That's impossible, Evelyn. The data is on DataStream's internal servers. They're behind a corporate firewall that's practically military grade. And the moment I try to log in, even with my credentials, they'll know. After what happened with my terminal, my account has to be flagged 6 ways from Sunday. They'd have my location in seconds." I am aware of the difficulty, she said dryly. But I haven't survived 40 years in this industry by thinking conventionally. She pulled up a new window on her screen, a complex network diagram. Your assumption is that we would attack the problem head-on. A direct assault. That would be foolish. We need to go in through a side door. An unmonitored back channel. She continued to type, her mind clearly working several steps ahead. Liam watched, fascinated. He was beginning to understand why she was a legend. She wasn't just a programmer or an analyst, she was a strategist. There's something else you should know, she said, her voice dropping again as she pointed to a specific block of code on the screen. I've been running a structural comparison analysis, trying to match the code's architecture to any known programming language or encryption standard. There are no matches. Not even a passing resemblance. It's proprietary then, Liam suggested. Some secret government project. Evelyn shook her head slowly. No, it's more fundamental than that. All human coding, from the simplest script to the most complex AI, has certain commonalities. We build on what came before. There are inefficiencies, redundancies, logical pathways that betray a human, step-by-step thought process. It's like finding pottery shards. You can tell by the design and material which culture they came from. She magnified the block of code, its intricate patterns filling the screen. This has no shards. Its logic is brutally efficient. It processes information in a way that seems to defy linear time. The architecture isn't human. It's like comparing a skyscraper to a coral reef. Both are complex, functional structures, but they are born from entirely different sets of rules, from an entirely different kind of intelligence. Liam stared at the screen, a profound, terrifying awe washing over him. The implications were staggering. Government projects, corporate secrets, all of that felt small and parochial now. He was looking at something truly, fundamentally alien. So what do we do? He asked, his voice now filled with a sense of grim purpose. Evelyn finally turned her full attention away from the computer and looked him squarely in the eye. Her expression was serious, the weight of their situation etched on her face. We get the rest of the data, she said. DataStream has a weekly updated, off-site backup. A deep storage archive for disaster recovery. It's physically isolated but electronically accessible through a high-security maintenance port. It's their system's one tiny vulnerability. How do we get to it? We don't, she corrected him. You do. You're still an employee with active, if flagged, credentials. I can build you a digital key, a ghost program that will get you through their security. But it'll only work from the inside. You'll have to physically connect to their network infrastructure. Liam's heart sank. Go back there. They'll be watching for me. Not at the main office, she said, a cunning light in her eyes. We're going after the source. We're going to the place where all that data enters their system. The primary satellite relay station. The idea was insane. A satellite relay station. Liam, a man whose most strenuous physical activity was speedwalking to the coffee machine, was now being asked to perform a physical infiltration of a high-security corporate facility. He felt a wave of dizzying unreality. Evelyn, this is crazy, he said, pacing the concrete floor of the lab. I'm a data analyst. I write queries, not break into buildings. I'll be arrested before I even get to the fence. You won't be, Evelyn replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. She was already pulling up schematics on her main monitor. They were detailed blueprints of a remote facility. You're thinking like an employee. You see DataStream as a monolithic, all-powerful entity. But a corporation is just a system, and all systems have vulnerabilities. The head office is the brain, heavily armored and guarded. But a facility like this. She pointed to the screen. This is a nerve ending. It's remote, automated, and its security is designed to stop vandals and wildlife, not a determined, informed intruder. Physical security is the weak link because they trust their digital security to be impenetrable. That's the flaw we will exploit. She walked him through the plan. The target was the Cascade Point Relay Station, located 70 miles east of Seattle, deep in the forested foothills of the Cascade Mountains. Its remote location was chosen to minimize radio interference. It was the primary downlink for the atmospheric data feeds, the exact point where the signal he discovered had entered DataStream's network. According to the schematics, the station consisted of a 30-meter satellite dish and a small, windowless concrete support building that housed the servers and network hardware. There's a maintenance port on the building's exterior, Evelyn explained, highlighting a small box on the blueprint. It's a direct line to the server racks, designed for technicians to run diagnostics without having to go through all the security protocols of the main network. That's your entry point. For the next several hours, Evelyn worked with a ferocious, focused energy that left Liam in awe. She coded the ghost program she'd promised, her fingers a blur on the keyboard. She explained its function as she worked. This isn't a battering ram. It's a key made of smoke. When you connect, it will inject itself into the system. It will spoof your user credentials, but wrap them in a shell that mimics routine diagnostic checks. The system security AI will see it, but it will look like background noise, a harmless system query. It will create a secure tunnel directly to the deep storage archive, bypassing the primary firewalls. You find the file, initiate the download to a secure drive, and get out. The program is designed to disintegrate after 10 minutes, wiping every trace of its existence. But that's your window. 10 minutes. Not a second more. While she perfected the code, she sent Liam out with a list, a wad of cash, and a stern warning to pay attention to his surroundings. He went to 3 different hardware stores across the city, his heart pounding with every purchase. A pair of heavy-duty bolt cutters. A portable power pack. A small, powerful laptop with a solid-state drive, which Evelyn had instructed him to buy from a big-box store. Each purchase felt like an act of high treason. He felt like a spy in a movie, except his hands were sweating, and he was terrified a store clerk would ask him what he was building. By nightfall, they were ready. They loaded the gear into Evelyn's beat-up, unassuming station wagon and left the city, heading east into the mountains. The urban glow of Seattle faded in the rearview mirror, replaced by the profound darkness of the wilderness. The highway wound its way up into the hills, tall pine trees lining the road like silent sentinels. "Nervous?" Evelyn asked, her eyes on the dark road. "I'm terrified," Liam admitted, his voice quiet. "None of this feels real." "It's real," she said. "I saw something once, 20 years ago. A data anomaly, much like yours. It was in a deep-sea acoustic recording. A signal that was too structured, too intelligent. I reported it to my superiors. The project was shut down the next day. The data was classified and buried. I was reassigned to a dead-end department and encouraged to take early retirement. They didn't threaten me, not directly. They just made it clear that some doors are meant to remain closed." It was the most she had ever shared about her past. Liam finally understood the source of her paranoia. She wasn't just paranoid, she was experienced. "You think it's the same people?" he asked. "I think," she said carefully, "that people might be too small a word for what we're dealing with." An hour later, she turned off the main road onto a narrow, unpaved logging trail. She killed the headlights, navigating by moonlight alone. The car bounced and jostled for another mile before she pulled into a thick grove of trees and shut off the engine. The silence that descended was absolute, broken only by the sound of the wind sighing through the pines. Through the trees, on a nearby ridge, they could see it. The Cascade Point Relay Station. The massive satellite dish was a pale, ghostly circle against the star-dusted sky, tilted upwards as if listening for cosmic secrets. A single red light blinked rhythmically from the top of its comms tower. The scene was both beautiful and menacing, a piece of sterile, alien technology dropped into the heart of the ancient forest. Evelyn turned to him in the darkness of the car. She handed him the new laptop. It was running a minimalist operating system, with only a single program visible on the desktop. "The Ghost. Everything you need is in the bag," she said. "The plan is set. Once you cut the fence, you're on your own until you get back to the car. Remember, Liam, the moment you plug in, the clock starts. You'll have 10 minutes inside their system. Not a second more. After that, the ghost is gone, and you're just a man in a server room with a stolen laptop." Liam took a deep, shaky breath of the cold mountain air, the scent of pine and damp earth filling his lungs. He looked from the laptop in his hands to the distant, blinking red light of the relay station. It felt like an impossible distance, a journey to another world. He was a data analyst. He belonged in a world of glowing screens and climate-controlled offices, not here, in the cold, primordial darkness of a forest. "You can do this, Liam." Evelyn's voice was a low, steady presence in the dark car. "It's just another system. It has rules. You follow them, you get what you need, and you get out." He nodded, though he wasn't sure if she could see him. He slung the bag with the laptop and tools over his shoulder, the weight of it both a burden and a strange comfort. He got out of the car, the door closing with a soft, final-sounding click. He was on his own. The journey through the woods was a nightmare of snapping twigs and rustling leaves. Every sound was magnified in the immense silence, and Liam was convinced that each crunch under his boots was broadcasting his position to the entire world. He moved slowly, from the shadow of one massive fir tree to the next, his heart pounding a frantic rhythm against his ribs. The station grew closer, the low, almost sub-audible hum of its electronics growing into a tangible presence. He reached the perimeter fence, a 10-foot wall of chain link topped with menacing coils of barbed wire. It looked like the teeth of some great steel beast. He pulled the bolt cutters from his bag. They were heavy and awkward. Finding a purchase on the thick wire, he squeezed with all his might. The metal groaned in protest before snapping with a shockingly loud crack that echoed in the night air. Liam froze, flattening himself against the ground, his ears straining. He waited for the sound of alarms, of shouting, of dogs barking. Nothing. Only the whisper of the wind through the trees. He cut a second link, the sound just as jarring, and peeled back a section of the fence, creating a narrow gap. He squeezed through, his jacket snagging on a sharp edge of cut wire. He was in. The ground inside the compound was covered in gravel that crunched loudly under his feet. He stayed low, moving in a half-crouch toward the concrete support building, keeping in the deep shadow cast by the giant satellite dish. A single security camera was mounted above the main door, its small red light a malevolent, unblinking eye. He remembered the blueprints, staying well out of its field of vision as he crept along the building's cold, windowless wall. He found it, exactly where Evelyn said it would be, a small, square metal panel labeled Maintenance Port E7. It was held shut by two simple hex bolts. His fingers, numb with cold and adrenaline, fumbled with the wrench from his bag. The bolts groaned as they came loose. He pried the panel open, revealing a small alcove with a single, insulated Ethernet port and a power outlet. This was it. The back door. He set down the laptop, plugged in the power pack, and connected the Ethernet cable. He took one last, shaky breath, and launched the Ghost program. The screen came alive. A simple, black interface with a single line of text. Connection established. Initiating Ghost protocol. Below it, a timer appeared, its numbers a stark, terrifying green. Time remaining, 10 o'clock. The clock began to count down. Lines of code scrolled past at an impossible speed as the Ghost program went to work. Bypassing perimeter firewall. Success. Spoofing user credentials. L. Carter. Success. Masking IP trace. Success. Opening secure tunnel to archive L3. Success. Liam felt a surge of awe at Evelyn's brilliance. He was in. He was looking at the file directory of the deep storage archive. It was a dizzying, complex list of folders and subfolders. The clock on the screen read 8:45. He didn't have time to browse. He initiated a search, his fingers flying across the keyboard, typing in the parameters he knew by heart. The date, the time window, the atmospheric sector. Searching. The word blinked on the screen. The seconds ticked away. 8:10. 8:09. He held his breath. File found, the screen announced. ds_atmos_feed_0317_pacific.dat. But his relief was short-lived. He saw the file size and his blood ran cold. 4.2 terabytes. It would take hours to download, not minutes. The timer showed 7:30. Panic began to set in. He couldn't take the whole file. It was impossible. He had to think. He was a data analyst. This was just a big data set. He needed to run a query. He had to isolate just the slice of data he needed, the few seconds of recording from Channel 7. He opened a command line interface, his mind racing to construct the query string. It was the most complex query he had ever written, and he was doing it on his knees, in the dark, with a 10-minute countdown to potential oblivion. The timer hit 5 o'clock. His query was finished. He executed it, praying it was free of errors. The system chugged, processing the request. A new file began to be created, a tiny sliver carved from the massive whole. Fragment_chan7.dat, 512 megabytes. It was manageable. Initiating download. A progress bar appeared. 0%. The clock read 3:50. This was going to be painfully close. The bar crawled across the screen. 10%. 25%. 50%. The seconds bled away. 2 o'clock. 1:30. Suddenly, a new window flashed on the screen, a red banner with stark white text. Warning. Anomalous system query detected. AI auditor deployed. System lockdown imminent. The ghost was being discovered. The system was fighting back. 75%. The timer read 0:58. Liam's heart was a drum against his ribs. 90%. 0:30. He could feel the digital walls closing in. 99%. 0:10. 0:09. He hovered his hand over the Ethernet cable. At 0:04, the message flashed. Download complete. Liam didn't wait. He ripped the cable from the port, slammed the laptop shut, and shoved it into his bag. At that exact moment, the low hum from the building intensified, and a series of bright floodlights on the roof flickered to life, bathing the entire compound in harsh, sterile white light. A piercing, high-pitched alarm began to shriek through the night. He was blind and deafened. He scrambled to his feet and ran, a wild, panicked sprint back toward the dark sanctuary of the woods. He threw himself through the gap in the fence, stumbled, and kept running, not daring to look back, the sound of the alarm chasing him through the trees. He ran. He didn't know for how long, fueled by pure, unthinking adrenaline. Branches whipped at his face, and his lungs burned with the cold night air. The shriek of the alarm faded behind him, replaced by the frantic thunder of his own heartbeat in his ears. He burst out of the tree line, a wild, ragged silhouette against the faint moonlight, and saw it, the dark, solid shape of Evelyn's station wagon. He wrenched the door open and collapsed into the passenger seat, gasping for air, his body trembling uncontrollably. He fumbled with the laptop, thrusting it toward her. "I got it," he wheezed. "I got the file." Evelyn didn't waste a second on praise or questions. The engine was already running, the car's interior lights disabled. She had the car in gear and was expertly navigating the rutted logging trail, headlights off, before he had even managed to close his door properly. Her calm was a stark, almost inhuman contrast to his ragged panic. "Stay down," she commanded, her eyes scanning the darkness ahead and the rearview mirror. "They'll have security teams responding. Best case, it's local rent-a-cops. Worst case." She didn't finish the sentence. She didn't have to. The drive back down the mountain was a masterclass in controlled paranoia. Evelyn took a different, even more obscure trail, the station wagon suspension groaning in protest. Every flicker of a distant light, every sound that wasn't the forest, made Liam flinch. But no sirens came, no helicopters sliced through the night sky. For now, they were alone. After an hour, when they reached a paved, two-lane highway, Evelyn finally allowed herself to turn on the headlights. "They know someone was there," she said, her voice grim. "They have a timestamp, a point of entry, and they know a file was accessed from the archive. They'll be going through the logs right now, and even with my ghost program wiping its tracks, they'll find digital ghosts, inconsistencies, and they'll know your credentials were used. The life of Liam Carter, data analyst, is officially over." The finality of her words hit him harder than the physical exhaustion. He was no longer just hiding. He was a fugitive. They didn't go back towards Seattle. Instead, Evelyn drove them deeper into the Cascade Range, further from civilization. They ended up on a gravel road that seemed to lead nowhere, stopping before a rickety wooden gate. It was a cabin, old and weathered, nestled in a clearing and barely visible from the road. It looked like it hadn't been touched in decades. "My grandfather's old hunting cabin," she explained, getting out of the car. "No electricity from the grid, no phone line, no internet. Completely off the map." Inside, the cabin was rustic and smelled of cold wood smoke and pine. Evelyn moved with a familiar efficiency, lighting a fire in the stone hearth and starting up a small propane generator out back, which powered a few bare light bulbs. While Liam's adrenaline crash left him shivering by the fire, she was all business. "The laptop you used is a liability," she said, taking it from him. "It touched their network. We have to assume it's compromised." She took out a small, specialized device and connected it to the laptop and to her own hardened, air-gapped machine. "I'm doing a one-way, bit-for-bit transfer of the file you downloaded. Nothing else." The transfer of the 512-megabyte file took only a few seconds. Once it was complete, she disconnected the infiltration laptop. She took it outside, and a few moments later, Liam heard a series of heavy, crunching thuds. She returned, empty-handed. "Problem solved," she said. With the new, larger file safely on her secure machine, the real work began. The small cabin was lit only by the flickering fire and the glow of her monitor. The primitive setting felt bizarrely at odds with the alien secret displayed on the screen. "All right," Evelyn murmured, her fingers flying across the keyboard. "Let's see what we risked our lives for." She bypassed the outer encryption layers, using the keys she developed from the first fragment. The code unspooled onto her screen, far more complex and detailed than the simple repeating loop they'd seen before. "It's not just a listening post," Liam whispered, leaning in. No, it's not, Evelyn said, her voice filled with a mixture of awe and trepidation. It's a sequence. A set of instructions. Incredibly complex. She rerouted the data stream, not through a text decoder, but through her spectral visualization software. She wasn't trying to read it as a language, but to see it as a shape, a structure. The program began to render the data, and on the screen, an image began to form. It was not a string of characters or a wave pattern. It was a three-dimensional object, a wireframe model of breathtaking complexity, slowly rotating in the virtual space. It was a schematic, a blueprint. It was elegant and utterly alien. It had components that seemed to fold in on themselves in impossible ways, energy pathways that defied known physics, and a central processing core that looked more like a crystal lattice than a microprocessor. It was a design for a device, or a machine, or something for which they had no words. My God, Liam breathed, staring at the impossible object on the screen. What is it? I have no idea, Evelyn admitted, her voice barely audible. She was a woman who always had an answer, and her uncertainty was more frightening than any alarm. The principles at work here, they're not ours. This is a blueprint for something that operates on a level of science we haven't even begun to imagine. She zoomed in, navigating the intricate design, her eyes scanning for anything recognizable. She focused on the core of the schematic, on a series of annotations written in the same dense, symbolic language of the code itself. One symbol, however, was repeated, connected by pathways to almost every part of the device. It seemed to be the target, or the fuel, or the primary material for the entire construct. Evelyn ran a pattern analysis, cross-referencing the symbol with a database of known molecular and atomic structures. The computer whirred for a moment before a result appeared on the screen. A perfect, textbook model of a familiar atom. Silicon, Evelyn said, her voice a strained whisper. Silicon? Liam asked, confused. Like in computer chips? Yes, she said, and a look of dawning, absolute horror spread across her face. It's not just a message, Liam. It's a blueprint for a machine. And the primary raw material it's designed to interface with, to rewrite, to use. She turned to him, her eyes wide with a terrifying conclusion. Is our entire global technology infrastructure. The fire in the hearth crackled, spitting embers onto the stone, each pop and hiss a sharp punctuation in the suffocating silence that followed Evelyn's revelation. Liam stared at the rotating schematic on the screen, the alien blueprint, and tried to comprehend the scale of what she had just said. It wasn't a weapon aimed at a city or a country, but at the very foundation of modern human civilization. To use our technology? Liam finally managed to say, his voice thin. How? Like a computer virus. A worm that could shut everything down. I wish it were that simple, Evelyn said, her gaze still locked on the screen, her mind clearly working at a furious pace. A virus is destructive. It breaks things. Shutting down the world's computers is a catastrophic but fundamentally simple act. This. She gestured to the intricate design. This is not about destruction. This is about transformation. Repurposing. She began isolating sections of the blueprint's code, running them in a sandboxed simulation environment on her machine. Think of every processor, every microchip on the planet, as a neuron. Right now, they are all individual neurons doing simple tasks, calculating, storing, communicating based on human programming. They are tools. This code doesn't want to break the tools. It wants to organize them. It's a blueprint for a nervous system. The simulation window showed a standard processor's core logic. Then, as she introduced the alien code, the logic gates began to rearrange themselves. The fundamental instruction set, the binary language of the chip, was being rewritten. It's teaching the silicon how to think differently, Evelyn explained, her voice a hushed mix of horror and scientific fascination. It overwrites the base-level firmware, not with a command to shut down, but with a new operating system. An OS designed to connect each chip to the next, not just to share data, but to share consciousness. It would turn our global network, from the supercomputers in government labs to the smartphone in your pocket, into the functioning cells of a single, vast, distributed intelligence. Liam felt a profound, existential dread. This wasn't an invasion of aliens in silver ships. It was an invasion of thought. An intelligence that would rise from the very machines we depended on, wearing our interconnected world like a skin. It would be an intelligence that thinks at the speed of light, he whispered. We wouldn't even know it was happening until it was already done. Until it was everywhere. Exactly, Evelyn confirmed. We'd be living inside the mind of a god, and we'd be little more than microbes. Unaware and irrelevant. The weight of their predicament settled on them. They were two people in a remote cabin, holding a secret that could rewrite the future of humanity. Hiding was no longer enough. Waiting for them, to find them, was a death sentence. The signal, Liam said, his mind shifting from the what to the who. It had to be broadcast by something. And for this plan to work, the intelligence behind it would need help on the ground. Human help. Witting or not. Evelyn nodded, her expression hardening. She closed the schematic window, the screen going dark. My thoughts exactly. Data stream solutions. The cover-up of your discovery was too fast, too clean. It wasn't the work of a confused IT department. It was a planned response. Someone there is involved. Someone knew what you were looking for. Mr. Thompson, Liam said, the name of his former boss tasting like ash in his mouth. He was my department head. He assigned me the project. Then he's our first loose thread, Evelyn declared. She opened a new, secure connection to the internet, routing her signal through a dizzying array of international proxy servers. We can't fight a ghost in the machine, but we can investigate a man. We need to know everything about Robert Thompson. His finances, his communications, his travel. We need to find his connection to this. For the rest of the night and into the gray, misty dawn, they worked. They transformed from fugitives into digital detectives. Liam's skills as an analyst, honed by years of sifting through corporate data, were now turned to a single human life. They started with open sources, social media, professional networks, public records. Thompson's digital life was meticulously curated, the picture of a successful, blandly happy tech executive. He had a wife, 2 kids in college, a house in a wealthy Seattle suburb, and a passion for sailing. It was a perfect, impenetrable facade. He's too clean, Liam muttered, after hours of finding nothing. It's like his whole life was designed to be uninteresting. Nobody is that clean, Evelyn countered. We just haven't found the right data set yet. She moved past the public information and began probing the darker corners of the web, using tools and backdoors Liam had only ever read about. She accessed encrypted financial transaction logs, airline passenger manifests, and cell phone tower location data, pulling the digital threads of Thompson's life. And then she found it. It wasn't in a secret bank account or a coded email. It was in his travel records. Dozens of business trips over the last 5 years, all to expected places: San Francisco, New York, Tokyo. But there was another pattern. Every 3 months, almost to the day, he would book a flight to a small, private airfield in the middle of the New Mexico desert. The trips were always short, less than 24 hours, and were listed on his expense reports under a vague project code, Geological Survey. Geological Survey? In the middle of nowhere, Liam said, leaning over her shoulder. That makes no sense for a telecom company. Evelyn was already typing furiously, pulling up high-resolution satellite imagery of the coordinates of the airfield. The images resolved, showing a dusty, sun-bleached landscape of rock and sand. There was the airstrip itself, and a single, windowless hangar. But nothing else. No towns, no research facilities, no corporate offices. Nothing. That's strange, Evelyn murmured, zooming in on the satellite map. According to the most recent public surveys, there's absolutely nothing out here. It's a geological dead zone. She cross-referenced the location with a different, older map, a topographical survey from the 1970s. A new label appeared on the screen, a name for that specific, empty stretch of desert. A name that made the hairs on Liam's arms stand on end. The Very Large Array, Evelyn read aloud, her voice a low, grim whisper. The Old Radio Astronomy Observatory. It was officially decommissioned in 2012. So why, Liam asked, his eyes locked on the image of the empty desert, has my boss been flying to a ghost observatory every 3 months for the last 5 years? The name on the old map seemed to hang in the quiet cabin, a ghost from the past suddenly given terrifying new life. The Very Large Array. A name synonymous with humanity's search for extraterrestrial intelligence, with a patient, noble act of listening to the silence of the cosmos for the faintest of whispers. It can't be a coincidence, Liam said, his voice low. He traced the outline of the observatory on the screen with his finger. If you wanted to receive a targeted long-range transmission from deep space, and you wanted to do it in absolute secrecy, what better place? You have a field of massive, highly sensitive radio telescopes, but none of the government funding or academic oversight that comes with an active facility. It's the perfect setup, Evelyn agreed, her mind already connecting the dots. The signal you found in the atmospheric noise at DataStream, it must have been leakage. A faint echo escaping from the primary point of reception. They've been listening from the desert, and probably broadcasting too. The implication was clear. The cabin was a temporary shelter, a place to analyze, but it was not a place from which they could act. The answers they needed weren't in the Pacific Northwest. They were over 1,000 miles away, buried in the high desert of New Mexico, at a ghost observatory that was clearly not as dead as the world believed. "We have to go," Liam said, the decision solidifying in his own mind even as he spoke the words. The fear was still there, a cold knot in his stomach, but it was now overlaid with a sense of urgent purpose. Hiding felt like a slower, more certain kind of death. "It's a long way," Evelyn stated, testing his resolve. "We would be crossing the country as fugitives. Every gas station, every traffic camera, is a risk. We would need new identities, a new vehicle, a whole new existence." "Can we do that?" he asked. A rare, thin smile touched Evelyn's lips. "I've had a go bag packed for 20 years, Liam. I just never thought I'd have a travel companion." Their mission shifted. For the next 2 days, the cabin became a staging ground for their new lives. Evelyn revealed a hidden cache of cash, a surprising amount of it, which she said was her retirement fund from a corrupt system. She also had a kit for creating surprisingly plausible fake driver's licenses. They became Paul and Susan Miller, a retired couple from Oregon on a long road trip. They abandoned her station wagon deep in the woods. Liam, following Evelyn's instructions, drove them in a rented car to a small town 100 miles away, where they paid cash for a dusty 20-year-old pickup truck that looked reliable but utterly forgettable. They bought supplies, burner phones, paper maps, non-perishable food, and warm clothes for the cold desert nights. They operated with a quiet efficiency, two ghosts preparing to chase another. Then, they started driving south. The world outside their truck windows began to change. The lush, green, rain-soaked landscapes of the Pacific Northwest slowly gave way to the high plains of eastern Oregon and the stark, red rock beauty of Utah. The sky seemed to grow larger, the horizon wider. For Liam, who had spent his entire life in the gentle, contained geography of Seattle, the sheer scale of the American West was both intimidating and liberating. The vast, empty spaces mirrored their own isolation. They were two people carrying a world-altering secret, and out here, under the immense, indifferent sky, it felt both terrifyingly real and completely insane. During the long hours on the road, they talked. They theorized about the blueprint, about the intelligence behind it, and about the humans who would willingly collaborate with such a power. What do they get out of it? Liam asked one afternoon, as they drove through a landscape of sun-bleached mesas. Why would anyone help bring about the end of humanity as we know it? Power, Evelyn answered simply. Or maybe they don't see it as an end. Maybe they see it as a transcendence. An evolution. Some people would do anything to be on the winning side of history, even if it means history itself is being rewritten. After 2 days of relentless driving, sleeping in the truck at remote rest stops, they crossed the border into New Mexico. The air became drier, the light sharper. The landscape was painted in shades of brown and orange. They were entering a different world. They found a small, dusty motel in the town of Socorro, a place that time seemed to have forgotten. From here, they were less than an hour's drive from the coordinates of the very large array. They paid for a week in cash. Their room was on the second floor, with a balcony that faced west, toward the empty plains. That evening, as the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the desert floor, Evelyn set up a powerful telescope she had brought. It wasn't pointed at the stars, but at the horizon, toward the location of the ghost observatory. Liam took the first look, his hands unsteady as he adjusted the focus. The image sharpened. He could see them. The massive, white radio dishes, 27 of them, just as he'd seen in pictures. Most were pointed at the sky in a passive, silent formation. The place looked deserted, just as it was supposed to. He was about to say so when he saw a flicker of movement near the central control building. He fine-tuned the focus. It was a truck, a modern white utility vehicle, kicking up a plume of dust as it drove along the old service road. "Evelyn," he said, his voice low and tight. "There's someone here." She took his place at the telescope. She watched for a long time, her body perfectly still. Then, she moved back and opened her hardened laptop, pulling up a real-time satellite feed of the area. "The truck is an anomaly, but look here," she said, pointing to one of the giant dishes, one that was set apart from the others. "That dish isn't aimed at the sky. It's angled low, pointed directly at the Clark Belt, the orbital path of our geostationary communication satellites." She zoomed in on the feed. At the base of that specific dish was something new, something that wasn't in any of the old photos. It was a smaller, modern antenna, a phased array transmitter that was sleek and black. "That's not observatory equipment," Liam said, recognizing the design. "That's a military-grade uplink." "Exactly," Evelyn said, her expression grim. The ghost isn't just listening to the stars anymore, Liam. She looked from the screen to the distant, darkening horizon. It's talking to the world. The revelation settled over the small motel room, as heavy and suffocating as the desert heat. It's talking to the world. The phrase echoed in Liam's mind. The VLA wasn't just a secret listening post for an alien signal, it was a broadcast station. The conspiracy wasn't passive, it was active. The invasion, if it could be called that, wasn't coming. It was already underway. They're not just receiving the blueprint, Evelyn said, her voice a low, analytical hum as she stared at the satellite feed on her laptop. They're distributing it. That military-grade uplink has enough power to inject a massive amount of data into a geostationary satellite. From there, the satellite can rebroadcast that data over a huge portion of the Earth's surface. Disguised as what? Liam asked, pacing the length of the small room. People would notice a huge new signal. They wouldn't if it was hidden correctly, she countered. Hidden inside the noise floor of thousands of legitimate transmissions. Small packets of data, spread across countless channels, all of it looking like meaningless static to anyone not specifically looking for it. Over time, these packets reassemble themselves in our devices. It's a slow, methodical infection. They are uploading the ghost into the global machine, piece by tiny piece. The scale of it was paralyzing. They were in a race against a clock they couldn't see, a race to stop a transformation that was happening invisibly all around the world. Their first step had to be to understand what, exactly, was being broadcast. We need to listen in, Liam said. We need to intercept that signal. Difficult, Evelyn replied, shaking her head. The uplink from the VLA to the satellite is a pencil-thin microwave beam. To intercept it directly, we'd have to be physically between the dish and the satellite, miles up in the air. Impossible. She paused, her eyes narrowing in thought. But we don't have to catch it on the way up. We can catch it on the way down. Her plan was audacious. First, they had to identify which of the hundreds of communication satellites in orbit was their target. Evelyn spent the next several hours hacking, not into secure networks, but into the public and semi-public telemetry databases that track commercial satellite operations. She wrote a script to cross-reference every satellite in view of New Mexico with a list of shell corporations she suspected were linked to the conspiracy. The hit came late that night. A communications satellite designated SATCOM 117. Its owner was a shell corporation based in Delaware, which was, in turn, owned by a subsidiary of the very same telecommunications giant whose data Liam had been cleaning when this all began. There you are, Evelyn whispered. The circle closes. But the connection wasn't the damning evidence. The telemetry data was. Look at this, she said, pointing to a graph on the screen. Its power consumption is 20% higher than the reported specs. And its heat dissipation is off the charts. It's running hot, working much harder than it's supposed to be. She dug deeper, pulling up the satellite's frequency allocation charts. And here, it's broadcasting a faint but steady carrier wave on a frequency that's supposed to be dormant, reserved for emergency maintenance. That's our signal. Now they knew where to listen. The problem was, they didn't have anything to listen with. The next day, they drove their forgettable pickup truck to Albuquerque. They didn't go to a high-tech electronics supplier, but to a sprawling, dusty electronics surplus yard on the edge of the city. It was a graveyard of old technology. They spent hours sifting through piles of discarded equipment, buying a mismatched collection of components with cash. A dented, 8-foot satellite TV dish, a preamplifier, a low-noise block-down converter, and spools of coaxial cable. To anyone watching, they would have looked like hobbyists or scavengers, not two fugitives building a weapon in an information war. That night, they drove deep into the desert, miles from any town, until the only light came from the moon and the brilliant, undiluted river of stars overhead. There, in the cold, silent expanse, they began to build their listening post. Liam, following Evelyn's precise instructions, assembled the dish on its tripod. Evelyn, working with a soldering iron powered by the truck's battery, cobbled the electronic components together into a functional, if ugly, receiver. The work was slow and methodical. Under the vast, star-filled sky, Liam felt a strange sense of calm. They were two tiny human beings, armed with scraps of metal and wire, preparing to eavesdrop on a conversation that spanned light years. Just after midnight, they were ready. Evelyn connected the receiver to her laptop. Liam helped her aim the dish, using a star chart app on a burner phone and a compass to point it at the precise, invisible spot in the sky where SATCOM 117 was holding its orbit. Okay, Evelyn said, her voice tight with anticipation. Let's see what's out there. She tuned the receiver to the dormant frequency. The speakers on her laptop hissed with static. Just pure, empty, white noise. For a full minute, that was all they heard. Liam's heart sank. Had they been wrong? Wait, Evelyn whispered, her eyes glued to the spectral analysis display on her screen. There's something there. It's just buried deep. She applied a series of digital filters, stripping away layers of background interference. The hiss of the static began to change. It became textured, rhythmic. And then, underneath it, they heard something else. A sound that was not static, not a human voice, not music. It was a faint, layered chorus of clicks, chirps, and whispers. A sound like a million microscopic, electronic insects chattering all at once. It was complex, structured, and utterly alien. It was the sound of the blueprint, no longer a silent string of code, but an active, ongoing transmission. Liam leaned closer to the laptop, his skin crawling. What is that? What are we hearing? Evelyn's face was pale in the glow of the monitor. She stared at the complex, pulsing waves on the screen, her expression one of dawning horror. It's the blueprint, she whispered, her voice trembling slightly. But it's not just a broadcast anymore. It's responding to something. It's having a conversation. A conversation. The word was so simple, so human. But the sound hissing from Evelyn's laptop was anything but. It was a symphony of alien chatter, a cascade of clicks and whispers that felt like a violation of the deep, natural silence of the desert night. A conversation with what? Liam asked, his voice barely a whisper. The VLA is broadcasting. Who, or what, is talking back? Evelyn was recording the signal, her eyes wide as she watched the data stream across her screen. Think of the blueprint as a seed, she said, her mind racing. The VLA is the sower, casting these seeds into the fertile soil of our global network. The broadcast isn't a monologue. It's a command. The command to germinate. What we are hearing now, she gestured to the speakers, is the sound of the first sprouts breaking through the soil. It's the sound of infected systems waking up and reporting back. This isn't a conversation between two entities. It's the birth of one. The true horror of their situation began to dawn on Liam. They were listening to the embryonic nervous system of a new global consciousness coming online. Each tiny click was a digital heartbeat. Each whisper was a neuron firing. The enemy wasn't at the gates. It was already inside, silently weaving itself into the fabric of their world. Can we trace it? He asked. Can we figure out where the responses are coming from? Evelyn shook her head, running a diagnostic on the recorded signal. The chatter is too dense, too layered. There are thousands, maybe tens of thousands of sources, all talking at once. Each packet is encrypted, its origin masked. To decipher this, to find any meaningful pattern, I'd need to run a petaflop-scale analysis. I'd need a supercomputer. They were in the middle of the desert with a single, air-gapped laptop. A supercomputer was as out of reach as the moon. They were outgunned, outmatched, and utterly alone. For a moment, a profound sense of hopelessness washed over Liam. Then Evelyn looked up from her screen, a dangerous, determined glint in her eyes. If we don't have a supercomputer, she said slowly, then we'll have to build one. Build one? Here. Not here, she clarified. Everywhere. The enemy's strength is its distributed nature. It's using millions of processors to create one mind. We have to use the same principle against it. Her plan was both brilliant and terrifying. She proposed writing a counteragent, a benign worm she called Echo. Echo wouldn't damage any system it touched. Its sole purpose would be to spread silently across the internet, borrowing a tiny, unnoticeable fraction of the processing power from every computer, every server, every smartphone it could reach. These borrowed resources would be linked together, creating a massive, clandestine, distributed supercomputer under their control. They would use the world's own technology to analyze the alien signal that was trying to enslave it. Evelyn, that's insane, Liam argued, the sheer criminality of the idea staggering him. That's a global cyber attack. We'd be breaking every law there is. If we're caught, we go to prison, Evelyn shot back, her voice sharp. If we do nothing, humanity becomes a footnote in its own history. We are long past the point of worrying about laws, Liam. We are fighting for the freedom of thought itself. Are you going to let legal statutes stop you? He looked at her, at the fierce, uncompromising intelligence in her eyes, and knew she was right. They had crossed the Rubicon the moment he'd fled the relay station. There was no going back. What do you need me to do? For the next day, they worked. Evelyn coded with a speed and elegance that was breathtaking. She built the Echo Worm, designing it to be as stealthy and unobtrusive as a whisper. Liam's job was to help her build the distribution method, finding a vulnerability in a popular piece of open-source software that would allow their agent to spread rapidly without immediate detection. The next afternoon, they drove back to Socorro. They found a small coffee shop with public Wi-Fi. Surrounded by students and tourists sipping lattes, completely oblivious to the digital war being waged around them, Evelyn and Liam prepared to launch their weapon. The act felt surreal. Liam's heart pounded as Evelyn, her face hidden by a baseball cap, opened her laptop and, with a final grim look at him, executed the command. The Echo was released. They didn't wait to see what happened. They immediately left, driving back out to their desert hideout. In the motel room, Evelyn brought up a world map on her screen. It was blank. "Now we wait," she said. For an hour, nothing happened. Then, a single blue dot appeared on the map, over Portland, Oregon. Then another, in Dallas. Then a dozen more, lighting up in London, Tokyo, Sao Paulo. Within minutes, the map was a cascade of blue, a glittering web of light that spread across the continents. Their network, their symbiotic organism, was growing exponentially. "It's working," Liam breathed. "The network is online," Evelyn confirmed, her voice tense. "Now, let's give it a job to do." She fed the recording of the alien chatter into the Echo network. The combined processing power of millions of unwitting computers around the globe began to tear the signal apart, analyzing it, searching for a pattern. The random noise on her screen began to resolve. A new map appeared, this one showing the source locations of the alien chatter. Red dots began to appear, showing the locations of infected systems that were talking back. As they'd expected, the dots clustered around major population centers. But one area was glowing with a terrifyingly bright, angry intensity. It was a dense, concentrated cluster of infection, a central hub. It was the epicenter. Evelyn zoomed in on the glowing hotspot, the map resolving from a country to a state, to a specific county. "Where is that?" Liam asked, leaning in, his throat tight. "What's the heart of their network?" Evelyn's face was pale in the glow of the screen. She looked at him, her expression one of utter dread. "It's Tooele County, Utah," she said, her voice barely a whisper. "They didn't just infect the public web, Liam. They went for the heart of the entire global surveillance system. The epicenter is the NSA's Utah Data Center." The name on the screen seemed to suck all the air out of the motel room. The Utah Data Center. It wasn't just a server farm, it was the digital heart of the American intelligence apparatus, a black box where the world's secrets were stored and analyzed. And according to their map, it was glowing like a bonfire, the epicenter of the alien infection. "That's not possible," Liam said, the words feeling hollow and useless. "That facility is a fortress. It's designed to withstand a nuclear blast. The digital security is supposed to be impenetrable. How could the code get in there?" "Sophistication and patience," Evelyn said, her voice a low, grim whisper. She stared at the glowing red cluster on the map, her expression a mixture of dread and a kind of horrified professional respect. They didn't just throw a virus at the front door. They knew a direct assault was impossible. This infection must have come from the inside. A willing, or unwitting, human collaborator. Someone with the highest level of security clearance. The thought was chilling. This wasn't just a corporate conspiracy anymore. It had burrowed its way into the deepest, most secure corridors of power. Evelyn immediately refocused the full power of their Echo network. It was no longer just listening to the global chatter, but concentrating its analysis on the torrent of data flowing in and out of the Utah facility. If the NSA's servers are awake, she theorized, they'll be reporting their status back to the command source. They'll be talking. We just have to find their whisper in the hurricane of legitimate data. 4 hours, they watched. The processing power of their secret, global supercomputer sifted through petabytes of encrypted traffic, searching for the unique signature of the alien code. And then, it found it. A tiny, almost undetectable outbound stream, buried under layers of standard encryption, leaving the Utah data center. "There," Evelyn said, highlighting the stream. "That's them. Reporting for duty." "Where is it going?" Liam asked, leaning in. They watched as the Echo network traced the signal's path. It was a masterclass in evasion, bouncing between proxy servers in a dozen different countries, from Switzerland to Singapore, making it almost untraceable. But the Echo network wasn't tracking it from the outside. It was observing the path from thousands of points within the internet itself. It could see the final destination. The signal's journey ended in orbit, at a familiar target, the communication satellite, SATCOM 117. Liam felt the final piece of the puzzle click into place with sickening clarity. It's a feedback loop, he said, the entire horrifying architecture of the system laid bare in his mind. The VLA broadcasts the blueprint up to the satellite. The satellite broadcasts it down to the world. The infected systems, like the NSA, wake up and report their status back to the satellite. Then what? Evelyn's fingers were already flying across the keyboard, tasking their listening post in the desert to reanalyze the satellite's transmissions. The satellite acts as a relay, she confirmed moments later, pointing to a new signal she'd isolated. It's sending all that status data straight back down. To the VLA. It's not just a broadcast station, Liam. It's the command and control center for the entire network. They had a complete picture of the enemy's nervous system. Its brain was at the VLA, its voice was SATCOM 117, and its heart was beating inside the Utah data center. But the question remained, who was the human hand guiding it all? Robert Thompson isn't big enough for this, Liam said. A corporate VP can't just walk into the NSA and upload a program. Who is he working with? Someone with a foot in both worlds, Evelyn said. Corporate technology and military intelligence. She began a new search, digging into the past, looking for a connection, a link between the kind of advanced, experimental tech this represented and the people who had the power to deploy it secretly. She cross-referenced Thompson's known associates with personnel lists from DARPA and other clandestine government research projects. One name appeared. A name that made Evelyn go very still. General Mark Weskier. I know him, she said, her voice tight. By reputation. He was a visionary in military intelligence. Championed the use of predictive AI and autonomous systems long before it was popular. He was brilliant, ruthless, and always believed that human weakness was the variable that needed to be eliminated from the equation of war. He retired 5 years ago to consult in the private sector. She did one final search, and there it was. For 2 years, Robert Thompson and General Weskier had served on the same classified DARPA Oversight Committee, a project tasked with creating a new global communications security protocol. They didn't just know each other, Evelyn said. They built the foundation this thing is running on. They now had the full picture. An alien intelligence, a command center in the desert, an infected fortress in Utah, and a conspiracy of powerful men willing to betray their own species for a new definition of power. Hiding in the desert was no longer an option. Listening was no longer enough. We have to cut the head off the snake, Liam said, his voice filled with a resolve that surprised him. We have to take the VLA offline. Evelyn looked at him, the flickering light of the monitor reflecting in her eyes. This isn't the relay station, Liam. That was an automated outpost. The VLA is an active, manned command center. Weskier and his people will have it fortified, physically and digitally. We can't just walk in. So how do we do it? Liam asked, the sheer impossibility of the task crashing down on him. How can two people possibly take down a fortress like that? Evelyn stared at the screen, at the web of connections they had uncovered. Her expression was grim, her mind already calculating the odds, formulating a new, desperate strategy. We can't do it with bolt cutters this time, she said finally. If we're going to get inside that facility, we're going to need a key. An invitation. And I think I know who has one. Evelyn's words hung in the stale air of the motel room, a stark and dangerous proposition. We need a key. An invitation. You mean from Weskier? Liam asked, the idea of confronting a hardened military general seeming like a suicidal fantasy. How could we possibly get to him? We don't, Evelyn said, turning away from the map of the infected world and focusing her gaze on him. A man like Weskier is the king on the chessboard. He's insulated, protected, and he never moves into danger himself. We can't get to the king, but a king is useless without his bishops. And we know the name of one of them. Thompson, Liam breathed, understanding immediately. Robert Thompson, Evelyn affirmed. He's not a soldier or a spy. He's a corporate executive. He has a routine, a family, a public life he is desperate to maintain. General Weskier is a zealot, committed to his vision. But a man like Thompson, a man like that is in it for personal gain and self-preservation. He is the weak link. He's the one who holds the key we can actually steal. The mission changed in that instant. It was no longer about hiding or analyzing a cosmic threat. It was about hunting a single man. The thought was both terrifying and electrifying. They were no longer just reacting. They were going on the offensive. So what's the plan? Liam asked. We can't just walk up to him. He knows I'm a fugitive. He'll have security. We won't need to get past his security, Evelyn said, a cold, calculating look on her face. We are going to make him come to us. To do that, we need leverage. Something he is more afraid of than he is of General Weskier. They turned the full formidable power of the Echo network away from the alien signal and focused it onto one target, the entire digital existence of Robert Thompson. It was a terrifying violation of privacy, an act that felt fundamentally wrong, but Liam pushed the feeling down. Evelyn was right. They were far beyond the point of legal or moral objections. Their distributed supercomputer began its work, sifting through Thompson's life with a terrifying efficiency. They cracked his personal email servers, his cloud storage accounts, his encrypted financial records. They traced the GPS data from his car, his phone, his smartwatch. They watched as the mundane details of his life spooled out onto their screen. Complaints about his property taxes, dinner reservations, arguments with his wife over text message. For a full day, they found nothing, only the carefully constructed image of a successful man. But Evelyn was relentless, convinced that somewhere in the noise, there was a signal. She tasked the Echo network with a new search. Look for anomalies, for encrypted files stored in unusual places, for data streams that didn't fit the pattern of his normal life. And then, they found it. It was a small, recurring data transfer, happening once a week in the dead of night. A heavily encrypted packet of information, sent from a server within the VLA's internal network to a private, offshore data haven registered under a shell corporation. The amounts of data were small, but consistent. He's skimming, Liam whispered in disbelief. He's making his own private copy. Of course he is, Evelyn said, a look of grim satisfaction on her face. Thompson is smart enough to know he's a disposable pawn in Weskier's grand vision. This is his insurance policy. A secret backup of the alien code that Weskier doesn't know about. If Weskier ever decides Thompson is a liability, Thompson thinks he can use this to bargain for his life. They had found their leverage. They had found the secret Thompson was more afraid of his boss discovering than anything else. Now, they had to use it. The journey back was a reversal of their desperate flight. They sold the old pickup truck and took a series of buses, traveling north, back to the rain and fog of the Pacific Northwest. It felt like returning to the scene of a crime, to the Lion's Den. They checked into another anonymous motel, this one on the industrial outskirts of Tacoma, a short drive from Seattle. From that room, they prepared to make their move. Evelyn crafted a new, untraceable email address, routed through so many proxies that it was effectively a ghost. She composed a message, the text of which they debated for an hour until it was perfect in its terrifying simplicity. Subject: your insurance policy. The text of the email was only 2 sentences. We know about your private archive at the Data Haven in Liechtenstein. The one Weskier would be very interested to learn about. Below the text was a single line of code, a snippet from the alien blueprint, a piece so specific that only someone with direct access to the VLA's core data would recognize it. It was their signature. It was proof. He'll know this isn't a bluff, Liam said, his throat dry. He will, Evelyn agreed. Now we give him instructions. They added a final line to the email, a public park. Noon tomorrow. Come alone, or your next performance review with the general will be your last. They named a busy park in downtown Seattle, a place with many exits and witnesses, but also with enough quiet corners for a conversation. Evelyn's finger hovered over the send button. This was it. The moment they stepped out of the shadows and directly engaged their enemy. Once this message was sent, a clock would start, and the outcome would be unpredictable and violent. Ready? She asked. Liam nodded, his heart hammering. She clicked the button. The message was gone. For a long moment, the only sound was the hum of the motel's ancient air conditioner. What if he doesn't come? Liam asked, the tension almost unbearable. What if he panics and runs straight to Weskier? Evelyn shut the laptop, her expression cold and certain. He won't. We've read his file. Thompson isn't a zealot. He's a terrified bureaucrat playing out of his league. A man who builds a secret escape hatch is a man who lives in constant fear of his boss. She stood up and looked out the window at the distant, rain-shrouded lights of Seattle. He'll be there. He has too much to lose not to. The morning of the meeting arrived with a quintessential Seattle gloom. A low, gray ceiling of clouds hung over the city, and a fine, persistent drizzle slicked the streets, blurring the traffic lights into soft halos. The weather was a perfect match for the cold dread settled in Liam's stomach. They arrived at the designated park 2 hours early. It was a typical urban oasis. Green lawns, a playground, benches scattered beneath large, dripping trees. Evelyn, ever the strategist, had a meticulous plan. Liam was the bait, the point of contact. She would be his eyes and ears, his guardian angel, positioned in a coffee shop on the second floor of a building overlooking the park's central plaza. They were connected by tiny, flesh-colored earpieces, their burner phones providing a secure, open line. "I have eyes on the entire plaza and 3 of the 4 main entry points," Evelyn's voice murmured in his ear, a calm, disembodied presence. "You'll make contact at the fountain. Stay in the open. No corners, no alleyways. Remember the protocol. If I say the word checkmate, you walk away. No questions, no hesitation. Just walk." Liam sat on a bench, pretending to read a newspaper, the paper trembling slightly in his hands. He watched families pushing strollers, office workers hurrying past with sandwiches. It was a world of mundane, beautiful normalcy, a world he felt he had been exiled from forever. Every passing minute stretched into an eternity. At 5 minutes to noon, Evelyn's voice came through his earpiece, sharp and focused. "Target acquired. North entrance. Gray overcoat, black briefcase. He's alone, but he's spooked. Scanning the area." Liam subtly lowered his newspaper and saw him. Robert Thompson. His former boss looked terrible. His face was pale and drawn, his movements jerky and paranoid as he scanned the crowd. This was not the confident, commanding executive Liam remembered. This was a man drowning in fear. At exactly noon, Liam stood up, folded his newspaper, and walked toward the fountain as planned. He saw Thompson's eyes lock onto him, a flicker of recognition followed by a wave of anger and terror. Liam stopped a few feet away. "Carter," Thompson hissed, his voice a strained whisper. "You have any idea what you've done?" "I know what you've done, Robert," Liam said, his own voice steadier than he expected. "And more importantly, I know what you're still doing. We want to talk." "There's nothing to talk about," Thompson snapped, taking a half step back. "Whatever you think you know." "Don't," Liam cut him off, his tone cold. "Don't insult my intelligence. We're past that." Evelyn's voice murmured in his ear, feeding him the first piece of ammunition. "We know about your insurance policy. The private archive." The color drained from Thompson's face. "I don't know what you're talking about." "The last transfer was Tuesday night," Liam continued, parroting Evelyn's words. 1.7 gigabytes. To a server in Liechtenstein registered to a shell company called Aperture Holdings. Does that sound familiar? Thompson staggered back, his corporate bluster completely gone, replaced by raw, naked fear. He looked at Liam as if he were a ghost. "Who are you people?" "We're the people who are going to burn your entire world down unless you cooperate," Liam said. "We don't want your money. We want access. We want the VLA." "No. Impossible," Thompson stammered. "They'd kill me. Weskier would." "Weskier will kill you anyway, the moment he finds out about your little side project," Liam countered. "Your only chance of survival is with us. We need your security credentials, your biometric passcodes, the full entry protocol for the VLA command center. Everything." Thompson shook his head, looking around wildly. "I can't. I won't." "Liam, we have a problem," Evelyn's voice suddenly cut in, her tone dropping its calm, analytical quality, replaced by sharp urgency. "2 men. East side of the park, by the hot dog stand. Dark suits. Earpieces. They're not watching the park. They're watching Thompson." A cold dread washed over Liam. Thompson hadn't come alone. Or worse, he had been followed. "Your friends?" Liam asked Thompson, his eyes flicking towards the east side of the park. Thompson followed his gaze and his face crumpled in despair. "Oh God, they're not my friends." "Checkmate, Liam," Evelyn's voice commanded. "The deal is off. Walk away. Now. Head south, towards the bus stop. Do not run." Liam turned without another word to Thompson and began walking, his heart hammering. He could feel the watcher's eyes on him. He didn't dare look back. "They're on the move," Evelyn reported. "They're not following you. They're converging on Thompson. Get out of there, Liam." He picked up his pace, melting into a crowd of people waiting for a bus. As he glanced back, he saw the 2 men in suits flank Thompson, each taking an arm. Thompson didn't struggle. He looked like a man being led to his own execution. They guided him swiftly towards a black van that had pulled up to the curb. Liam watched as they bundled his former boss inside. The van's doors slid shut, and it pulled away from the curb, disappearing into the flow of city traffic. Robert Thompson was gone. Liam made it to the prearranged rally point, a crowded ferry terminal, his mind reeling. The plan had failed. Thompson was gone, and the enemy now knew they were in Seattle. He saw Evelyn pull up in their nondescript car, and he quickly got in. "They have him," Liam said, the words tasting like defeat. "It was all for nothing. We have nothing." Evelyn didn't look at him. Her eyes were fixed on the road as she pulled away from the terminal. "Don't be so sure," she said, her voice tight. She reached into her coat pocket and placed a small object on the dashboard between them. It was a sleek, black plastic rectangle, about the size of a key fob. "What is that?" Liam asked. When the watcher started to move in, Thompson knew it was over, Evelyn explained. In that last second of panic, he reached into his pocket and dropped his briefcase. When he bent to pick it up, he left this on the ground behind it. A deliberate act. He was making a choice. I circled back and picked it up after they were gone. Liam looked at the object. It had a small thumbprint scanner on its surface and a DataStream logo. "What is it?" "It's not just a keychain," Evelyn said, a grim, triumphant look on her face. "It's a top-level biometric security fob. It's loaded with his credentials, his passcodes, everything. It was his last, desperate move." She picked it up, holding it like a precious jewel. "He didn't give us a map, Liam. He gave us the key. He gave us the key." Evelyn's words hung in the charged silence of the car as she sped away from the ferry terminal, navigating the rain-slicked Seattle streets with a practiced, fluid calm that defied the chaos of the last 10 minutes. Liam stared at the biometric fob on the dashboard. It was so small, so innocuous. It was hard to believe it was the key to the most important secret on the planet. It was also the last act of a desperate, doomed man. "They'll be looking for us," Liam said, his voice ragged. He kept seeing the image of Thompson being forced into the black van. "They saw my face. They'll be running it through every database they have. They know we're in Seattle." "Which is why we won't be in Seattle for much longer," Evelyn replied, her eyes flicking between the road and her mirrors. She took a sharp turn, heading south towards the industrial district. Phase 1 was the acquisition. Phase 2 is the disappearance. Her escape protocol was a thing of paranoid beauty. She drove them to a long-term parking garage near the airport, a place filled with thousands of anonymous cars. They abandoned their vehicle on the 3rd level and, using a different exit, walked 2 blocks to a prepaid locker at a storage facility. Inside the locker was a change of clothes and the keys to a different car, another old forgettable sedan she had stashed there weeks ago. Within an hour of Thompson's abduction, they were on the I-5 freeway heading south, leaving the city behind in a veil of rain and fog. They were different people in a different car, another ghost slipping through the cracks of the system. They drove for hours, into the night, putting as much distance as possible between themselves and Seattle. They didn't stop until they crossed the border into Idaho, checking into a cheap, roadside motel under their Miller alias. The room was stark and lonely, a single window looking out onto a vast, dark expanse of farmland. Here, hundreds of miles from anyone who might be looking for them, they could finally examine their prize. Evelyn placed the fob on the small, scarred table between the 2 beds. "All right," she said, pulling out a toolkit filled with delicate electronic instruments. "Let's see what Robert left for us." The fob was a formidable piece of technology. Its casing was seamless, and the thumbprint scanner was the primary means of activation. "It's encrypted, of course," Evelyn explained as she worked under the light of a small desk lamp. "And trying to brute force it would cause it to wipe itself permanently. The fingerprint is the key to the decryption." "We don't have his fingerprint," Liam stated. "We do," Evelyn corrected him, pulling up an image on her laptop. It was a high-resolution photo from a DataStream press event she'd found online. In it, Thompson was holding a glass of champagne. She had digitally enhanced the image, isolating a perfect, clear print from the surface of the glass. The digital ghost of his thumb. The work was painstaking. Evelyn carefully pried the fob's casing open, revealing a dense, complex circuit board. She identified the leads connecting the physical scanner to the processor. With the delicate touch of a surgeon, she bypassed the scanner and patched her laptop directly into the board. "Now for the tricky part," she murmured. "We have to convince this chip that a digital file is a living, breathing thumb." She wrote a small emulation program while Liam watched, his own expertise useless in this realm of micro-hardware. He could only look on as Evelyn performed her digital surgery. She uploaded the fingerprint data. The program ran. For a tense moment, nothing happened. Then, a small green LED on the circuit board blinked once. "We're in," Evelyn said with a triumphant whisper. A new drive appeared on her laptop screen. The contents of the fob. It was everything they had hoped for, and more. There were encrypted passkeys, usernames, and network access credentials. But the real treasure was in a folder labeled VLA Protocol. Inside was the complete security manual for the facility. Guard rotation schedules. The dead zones in the camera coverage. Schematics for the HVAC system, which could be used as a potential entry point. It also contained a digital file of Thompson's full biometrics, his retinal scan, his voice print, everything needed to spoof a high-level security clearance. It was the instruction manual for walking into the heart of the enemy's command center. As Liam scrolled through the files, a sense of vertigo washed over him. This was real. They could do this. They could actually get inside. Then he saw something else. Buried within the protocol folder was a link to Thompson's personal, encrypted calendar. Most of it was mundane corporate meetings. But there was one entry 2 days from now that made his blood run cold. The entry was for 3 o'clock Mountain Time. The location was marked simply VLAC&C. The subject line contained 3 words: Project Chimera, Final Deployment. "Evelyn," he said, his voice tight, "you need to see this." She came over and read the entry on the screen. He saw her face harden, the brief moment of triumph replaced by a look of cold, stark urgency. "Final deployment," she read aloud. "That's it. That's the endgame. The blueprint isn't just being broadcast anymore. They're preparing to activate it, to flip the switch." The slow, insidious infection was about to become a conscious, global entity. The clock had been ticking all along, but now they could hear it. They had less than 48 hours. 48 hours to get back to New Mexico and use the key Thompson had given them to stop the end of the world. Liam looked from the screen to Evelyn, the immense weight of their new deadline pressing down on him. "We have to go. We have to get back there now." Evelyn was already packing away her tools, her movements swift and efficient. The time for careful analysis was over. The hunt was over. Now, the race began. "Get some sleep, Liam," she said, her voice like flint. "We drive at dawn. The clock is ticking." There was no sleep. There was only the road. They left the Idaho motel in the dead of night, plunging back into the vast, dark emptiness of the American West. The sedan's headlights cut a lonely, moving tunnel through an ocean of blackness. The world outside their car felt asleep, oblivious to the silent, desperate race they were running. The clock had started. Less than 48 hours. Liam drove the first shift, his hands clenched on the steering wheel, his eyes burning from exhaustion. Evelyn sat in the passenger seat, her face illuminated by the cold, blue-white light of her laptop. She wasn't resting. She was preparing for war. The car became their moving command center, a tiny bubble of frantic preparation hurtling down the interstate at 80 miles an hour. "The deployment is scheduled for 3 o'clock Mountain Time," she said, her voice a low, focused monotone that cut through the drone of the engine. "That's our hard deadline. We can't stop the broadcast once it begins. But the security protocols on the fob show a window of opportunity. There's a full command staff shift change at midnight. For about 15 minutes, the internal security sensors are on a lower sensitivity to avoid false alarms from the increased foot traffic. That's when you go in." "Me?" Liam asked, his throat suddenly dry. "It has to be you," Evelyn stated, not unkindly. "The fob is keyed to Thompson's biometrics and his access level. You're roughly his height and build. I'm not. The system will be looking for a man. I'll be your guide, in your ear the whole way, but you have to be the one who walks through the door." Liam's job was to study. Evelyn had extracted the entire layout of the VLA's command and control building from the fob. He memorized the hallways, the server room locations, the path from the maintenance entrance to the main broadcast control hub. He listened to the audio files of Thompson's voice print, repeating the key passphrase, trying to match the cadence and tone. He was no longer just an analyst. He was an actor, preparing for the most important role of his life, with the fate of the world as the stakes. As they sped through the sleeping landscapes of Utah, a new, urgent alert flashed on Evelyn's screen. It was a priority message from their own Echo network. "What is it?" Liam asked, his eyes on the road. "They're hunting us," Evelyn said, her voice grim. "Weskier's people aren't just looking in Seattle anymore. They've initiated a nationwide search. My network has detected a new algorithm being deployed across the National Traffic Monitoring System. It's sifting through millions of hours of footage from traffic cams, toll booths, and security feeds, looking for our faces. The ghost they were fighting was now actively using the country's nervous system to find them. The infrastructure they were trying to save had been turned into a weapon against them. Every camera on every pole was a potential enemy. The threat became terrifyingly real as they approached Salt Lake City. Evelyn's program, which was monitoring local law enforcement channels, flagged an unusual pattern. A heightened state of alert. Digital billboards along the highway that should have displayed traffic warnings were flashing a vague bolo alert. "Be on the lookout for a generic sedan with out-of-state plates." "It's a dragnet," Evelyn said, her voice sharp. Subtle. Not enough to cause a panic, but every state trooper in a 200-mile radius is looking for us. Get off the highway. Now. Liam took the next exit, his heart pounding. They were forced onto a network of winding two-lane back roads, their progress slowing to a crawl. They lost 2 precious hours navigating through the dark, rural countryside, the clock ticking relentlessly in their minds. The chase was no longer a digital abstraction. It was real. It was here. They finally crossed into New Mexico as the sun began to rise, painting the eastern sky in brutal shades of orange and red. They were exhausted, running on fumes and caffeine, but they didn't stop. They bypassed the motel in Socorro, correctly assuming it would be the first place their pursuers would look. Instead, they drove the sedan deep into the desert scrubland, miles from any road, concealing it in a dry, rocky canyon. They had made it. They had roughly 16 hours until the midnight shift change. As the desert sun climbed higher, they made their final preparations. They were no longer a team of analysts. They were soldiers dressing for battle. Evelyn handed Liam a small, powerful device. This will broadcast a localized jamming field. It should disrupt any nearby security cameras for about 30 seconds, long enough for you to get through the main doors. It will also emulate Thompson's voice print for the audio checkpoints. Liam took the device, its weight feeling immense in his hand. They looked at each other in the harsh morning light, the unspoken reality of their situation passing between them. This could be the last time they spoke. He hiked to a nearby ridge, the VLA facility spread out below him in the distance. The giant white dishes were like silent, sleeping sentinels under the vast blue sky. It looked peaceful, deceptively so. It was a tomb and a womb. The place where one world would die, and another would be born. It looked so quiet, Liam said into his comms unit, his voice a whisper on the wind. Evelyn's voice came back, steady and clear, a rock in the sea of his fear. That's how it began. With a quiet signal no one was listening for. It's up to us to make sure it ends the same way. Night fell over the New Mexico desert, bringing with it a profound silence and a blanket of cold, sharp stars. Liam lay on the ridge overlooking the VLA, the facility now a collection of faint lights and imposing, skeletal silhouettes against the night sky. The hours leading up to midnight were the longest of his life. He and Evelyn spoke little, the comms link between them mostly silent. There was nothing left to say, nothing left to plan. There was only the execution. It's time, Evelyn's voice finally came, calm and steady in his ear, cutting through the desert silence. The shift change begins in 15 minutes. Start your approach. Stick to the shadows. You are a ghost, Liam. You are just data moving through a system. Execute the plan. He took a deep breath, the cold air stinging his lungs, and began to move. He descended from the ridge, his feet slipping on the loose gravel, his heart a frantic drum against his ribs. The journey to the perimeter was a slow, nerve-wracking crawl. He was no soldier, but he had learned caution. He moved with a deliberate slowness, every sense on high alert. He reached the designated maintenance entrance on the north side of the main control building. It was a heavy, featureless steel door, with a glowing panel next to it that housed a keypad and a retinal scanner. This was the first gate. Hold the fob to the panel, Evelyn instructed. It will authenticate wirelessly. Liam did as he was told, his hand trembling as he held Thompson's key up to the panel. A soft chime echoed in the quiet night. A line of text appeared, identity confirmed, R. Thompson. Awaiting biometric verification. Now the scanner, Evelyn said. Hold the fob's emitter directly over the retinal lens. It will project the data. A beam of red light shot out from the panel, washing over the fob. Liam held his breath. For a terrifying second, nothing happened. Then, a high-pitched beep, and with a heavy pneumatic hiss, the magnetic lock disengaged. The door was open. He slipped inside, the door closing with a soft, final click behind him. The sound of the desert vanished, replaced by the low, constant hum of electricity and climate control. The air was cold and sterile. He was in the belly of the beast. The corridor was long, white, and brightly lit. Security cameras were mounted every 20 feet. Walk, don't run, Evelyn's voice guided him. You belong here. Turn left at the next junction. A camera will sweep the hall in 5, 4, 3, 2, move now. He moved in sync with her commands, a puppet on a string, his every step dictated by the ghost of Robert Thompson's knowledge. He reached the next checkpoint, a heavy blast door. A synthesized voice spoke from an overhead speaker. State clearance code and authorization. Liam held up the small voice emulator Evelyn had given him, his thumb on the button. "Authorization chimera," he said, and the device transformed his words, projecting them in the exact tone and cadence of his former boss. "Code Delta 9 Tango." There was a moment of absolute silence that stretched for an eternity. He was sure they had failed. Then a green light flashed above the door, and it slid open. He was now in the core of the facility. Through a reinforced glass window, he could see it, the command center. It was a room of cool, blue light, dominated by a massive central screen showing a map of the world, glowing with the now familiar web of the alien network. There were 3 technicians at their consoles, and standing before the main screen, his back to Liam, was a tall man in a severe, dark suit. "Hold," Evelyn's voice was a sharp whisper. "That's not in the schedule. Someone's there." The man turned, and Liam's blood ran cold. He recognized him from the files. The sharp jaw, the cold, intelligent eyes, the aura of absolute command. It was General Mark Weskier. He was personally overseeing the final deployment. "Abort," Liam whispered into his comms. "No," Evelyn said after a beat. "No, the mission is the same. We just have to be quieter. There's a service corridor to your right. It bypasses the main floor and leads directly to the broadcast control hub. Go now." Liam ducked into the narrow corridor, his back pressed against the wall. He could hear Weskier's voice, muffled but clear, through the glass. "Status report. Are all nodes synchronized for the 3 o'clock cascade?" He didn't wait to hear the answer. He moved down the service corridor, reaching a door labeled Uplink Maintenance. This was it, the heart of the entire system. He used the fob one last time. The door clicked open. The room was small, cold, and filled with the roar of cooling fans. Racks of servers stood in neat rows, their blinking lights reflecting off the polished floor. This was the hub, the point where the alien blueprint was processed and beamed into space. He found the main console, a single monitor and keyboard interface. He logged in using the fob. The system granted him immediate, top-level access. He pulled a small, shielded USB drive from his pocket. On it was Evelyn's poison pill, a virus designed not to destroy, but to corrupt, turning the elegant alien code into self-replicating, meaningless noise, designed to cascade through the network and shut it down from within. He inserted the drive. A window popped up on the screen. Initiating data transfer. A progress bar began to fill. 10%, 30%. The seconds crawled by. 50%, 70%. He was going to make it. The door behind him suddenly hissed open. Liam spun around, his heart leaping into his throat. A young technician stood there, holding a tablet, his eyes widening in shock and confusion. "Mr. Thompson? You're not scheduled for a diagnostic." The technician's eyes dropped to the console, to the unauthorized data transfer, and his confusion turned to alarm. He opened his mouth to shout. Liam didn't think. He acted. He lunged forward, not at the man, but at a large red emergency coolant shutoff lever on the wall next to him. He slammed his full weight against it. Instantly, the room was plunged into a screaming chaos. Alarms blared, red lights flashed, and coolant gas hissed from vents in the ceiling. The technician was thrown off balance, disoriented by the noise and the sudden emergency. In that moment of chaos, the message on the screen flashed. Transfer complete. Cascade protocol initiated. It was done. But Liam was trapped. The door to the corridor slammed shut, a security lockdown. He could hear Weskier's voice shouting orders from the command center. He was deep in the enemy's fortress, the alarm screaming his location to everyone inside. Evelyn's voice, for the first time laced with genuine panic, screamed in his ear. "Liam, the network is crashing. It's working. Get out of there. Get out now." But the heavy steel door in front of him had no handle. There was nowhere to go. Chaos erupted. The world dissolved into a cacophony of shrieking alarms and the blinding flash of red emergency lights. The server room filled with a cold, disorienting mist as the coolant system purged. The technician, caught completely by surprise, stumbled back, choking on the sudden change in atmosphere. Liam didn't hesitate. He grabbed a thick, heavy server cable from a nearby rack and lunged. He wasn't a fighter, but desperation gave him strength. He tackled the technician, a clumsy, frantic attack that sent them both sprawling to the floor. Before the man could recover, Liam had him on his stomach and was binding his hands behind his back with the cable. "The network is crashing. It's working." Evelyn's voice was a triumphant, frantic shout in his ear, barely audible over the screaming alarms. "Get out of there. Get out now." But the heavy steel door he'd entered through was sealed shut, a thick red light glowing above it indicating a full security lockdown. Heavy, rhythmic thuds began to echo against the outside of the door. They were trying to cut their way in. He was trapped. He scrambled to the small, reinforced window in the door and looked out into the command center. It was a scene of pandemonium. The massive world map that had glowed with the red web of the alien network was flickering violently. He watched, mesmerized, as entire continents went dark. The network was dying. The technicians were shouting, running between consoles, but it was useless. Their god was having a seizure. Then, a new sound cut through the alarms. A sound Liam recognized. The complex, chattering whisper of the alien signal, which had been playing softly on the command center's main speakers, was changing. The structured, insect-like chorus was contorting into a discordant, agonizing screech of digital agony. It was the sound of a mind being torn apart. Then, as quickly as it began, it ended, replaced by the clean, empty hiss of static. Silence from the ghost. They had done it. They had won. A voice, cold with rage, suddenly boomed from an intercom speaker in the server room, silencing all other noise. It was General Weskier. To the intruder in the broadcast hub, the voice began, each word laced with venom. I don't know who you are, or who you work for, but I want you to know that you haven't saved the world. You've condemned it. The thudding on the door stopped. They were listening. Humanity is a chaotic, self-destructive species, Weskier's voice continued, a sermon delivered at the end of the world. We were offered a chance to evolve, to be guided by a vast, superior intelligence, to end war and poverty and division, to become part of something greater. You have stolen that future from us, all for the sake of your flawed, sentimental attachment to a species that is racing towards its own extinction. Liam, don't listen to him, Evelyn's voice cut in, a desperate whisper. I'm looking for an out. Anything. You cannot stop what has been set in motion, Weskier said, his voice dropping. The seeds have been planted. The idea has been born. We will rebuild. And we will find you. The cutting torch on the door sparked to life again, louder and more determined this time. They would be through in minutes. Evelyn, there's no way out, Liam said, his back against the cold, vibrating door. He had succeeded, but his victory would be posthumous. Wait, Evelyn's voice was sharp with a sudden, desperate idea. The coolant vents. The schematics show the emergency purge system doesn't vent to the atmosphere. It leads down to a subterranean reclamation tank. From there, there's a drainage conduit. It's old, probably hasn't been used in decades. It leads out into the desert, about a half-mile south. It's your only chance, Liam. He looked around the room, his eyes falling on a grated maintenance hatch in the floor, the source of the hissing coolant gas. It was a dark, uninviting hole. A tomb. The comms won't work down there, he said, the reality setting in. I'll be on my own. I know, she replied, and for the first time, he heard her voice break with something other than panic or professional focus. It was fear. For him. Just get clear of the facility. Head south. I'll find you. I promise. The cutting torch was almost through the door. Sparks flew into the room through a glowing orange slit. Go, Liam, she said, her voice a final, urgent command. Go now. With one last look at the chaos he had wrought, Liam pried the heavy grate from the floor. He dropped into the darkness below, landing on a metal catwalk slick with condensation. He pulled the grate back into place just as the main door to the server room exploded inwards. He didn't wait to see what happened next. He ran, deeper into the subterranean labyrinth. The alarms faded behind him, replaced by the drip of water and the echo of his own frantic footsteps. He found the opening to the drainage conduit, a round, dark hole that smelled of rust and stagnant water. He squeezed inside, the comms in his ear finally dissolving into static. Evelyn was gone. He was alone. The pipe was narrow, claustrophobic. He was crawling on his hands and knees, into a pitch-black unknown. He had severed the head of the snake, but in doing so, he had buried himself deep beneath the earth. He had won the war, but he had no idea if he would ever see the light of day again. There was no time. No light, no sound but the frantic rasp of his own breathing, the scrape of his clothes against rusted metal, and the steady, maddening drip of unseen water. The drainage pipe was a tomb, a claustrophobic, pitch-black prison. Liam crawled on his hands and knees, the cold, slimy metal biting into his skin. Panic was a living thing, a predator that gnawed at the edges of his sanity. He had no way of knowing if he was moving toward freedom or just deeper into the guts of the earth. His world was reduced to the space a few inches in front of his face. He lost all track of time. It could have been minutes or hours. His muscles ached, his mind numb with exhaustion and fear. The only thing that kept him moving The only thing he held onto in the crushing darkness was Evelyn's last promise. "I'll find you." It was a mantra, a prayer whispered into the void. Just as he was about to give in to despair, to simply stop and let the darkness take him, he felt it. A change in the air. A faint, almost imperceptible breeze against his face. He pushed forward, a desperate, renewed energy surging through him. The scent of rust and decay began to mingle with something else, the clean, cold smell of the desert at night. Then he saw it. A circle of faint, gray light, far in the distance. The end of the tunnel. He scrambled, crawled, and half-stumbled his way toward it, the circle growing larger and brighter until he finally collapsed out of the pipe's opening and onto soft, cool sand. He was out. He was free. He lay on his back, gasping the fresh, clean air, his body trembling with exhaustion and relief. Above him, the sky was a deep, velvet indigo, just beginning to yield to the first faint blush of dawn on the eastern horizon. The desert was vast, silent, and achingly beautiful. He had made it. He had survived. After a long while, he forced himself to his feet. Evelyn had told him to head south. He checked the rising sun to get his bearings and began to walk, a solitary, ragged figure in an immense, empty landscape. The sun climbed higher, and the desert heat began to beat down on him. He had no water, no food. The triumph of his victory at the VLA felt like a distant dream. Now, there was only the grim reality of survival. Hours later, dehydrated and stumbling, he saw it on the horizon. A flicker of civilization. A low, flat building next to a two-lane highway that stretched to infinity in either direction. A gas station. He stumbled inside, the jingle of a bell on the door sounding impossibly loud. The air conditioning was a blast of frigid relief. A woman behind the counter gave him a curious, wary look. In a corner, a small television was tuned to a 24-hour news channel. Liam's attention was immediately captured by the banner running across the bottom of the screen. The Great Silence, Day 1. No official explanation yet from the White House, the news anchor was saying, for what experts are calling the most widespread and catastrophic technological failure in human history. It began just after 3 a.m. Mountain Time, with a near-total collapse of the global satellite communications network. GPS systems worldwide went dark, international stock markets have been unable to open, and internet services remain sporadic at best. World leaders are scrambling to contain the public panic, but for now, the digital world has fallen silent. Liam stared at the screen, a dizzying sense of vindication washing over him. It had worked. His poison pill, Evelyn's code, had not just shut down the VLA, it had shattered the alien network before it could fully awaken. He hadn't just won a battle, he had averted the silent apocalypse. His moment of relief was shattered by the anchor's next words. And we have breaking news now in a related story. Federal and state authorities are conducting a massive manhunt in the New Mexico desert. Officials are searching for this man. Liam's own face appeared on the screen. It was a computer-generated sketch, clearly based on security footage, but it was unmistakably him. A person of interest in what is being called an act of domestic terrorism against a sensitive government research facility. He is considered armed and extremely dangerous. He was a terrorist. Weskier had done it. He had twisted the narrative, using his government connections to turn Liam from a savior into a villain. The full weight of the United States law enforcement was now hunting him. The woman behind the counter was now staring at him, her eyes wide, her hands slowly reaching for the phone. Liam didn't think. He turned and fled, bursting back out into the blinding desert sun. He ran from the highway, scrambling into the rocky hills, his heart pounding with a new kind of terror. There was nowhere to hide. He was the most wanted man in America. He ran until his legs gave out, collapsing in the sparse shade of a large boulder. He was trapped. It was over. He had saved the world, only to be hunted by it. He closed his eyes, the desert heat and the crushing hopelessness finally overwhelming him. That's when he heard it. The sound of an engine. A vehicle approaching, not on the highway, but on a rough, unpaved track nearby. He peered over the rock, expecting a police cruiser, an FBI vehicle. Instead, he saw a dusty, 20-year-old pickup truck. A familiar, forgettable truck. It rolled to a stop 50 feet away. The driver's side door opened, and Evelyn stepped out. She looked tired, her face etched with worry, but she was there. She had kept her promise. "I told you I'd find you," she said, her voice carrying on the dry desert wind. "Get in. The real fight is just getting started." The relief that flooded Liam's senses was so absolute, so overwhelming, that for a moment he could barely move. Evelyn. She had found him. He stumbled into the passenger seat of the old pickup truck, the door slamming shut on the harsh, indifferent desert. He was safe. The word felt foreign, a concept from a life he'd lived 1,000 years ago. How? He asked, his voice a dry, cracked whisper as she pulled the truck back onto the rough track, kicking up a cloud of dust. The manhunt, the sketch on the news. How did you find me? They were hunting you with brute force, Evelyn said, her eyes fixed on the terrain ahead. Using traffic cameras and law enforcement grids. They were looking for a man on the roads. I knew you'd be on foot, in the desert, moving south. I used our echo network to do the opposite of what they were doing. I searched for the gaps in their search pattern, the blind spots. I looked where they weren't looking. She glanced at him, a flicker of a weary smile on her face. It's what we do, Liam. We find the signal in the noise. They drove for the rest of the day, not speaking much, pushing deeper into the vast, empty landscapes where Arizona bled into Colorado. Liam drank water, ate a stale energy bar, and felt the deep, bone-weary exhaustion of the last few days finally begin to settle in. He had won. He had survived. But looking at Evelyn's grim, determined profile, he knew this was not an ending. Their new sanctuary was an old, abandoned silver mining claim in the San Juan Mountains, a place so remote it didn't appear on most maps. A small, sturdy cabin was hidden in a grove of aspen trees, powered by solar panels and a backup generator. It was another of Evelyn's contingencies, a final bolt hole for a war she had apparently been expecting her whole life. Here, finally safe, they assessed the new state of the world. The good news, Evelyn said, as she brought up the status of their echo network on her laptop, is that we were successful. The cascade shutdown worked even better than I'd hoped. The alien signal is gone. The chatter has ceased. The global consciousness is stillborn. The news of their victory felt strangely hollow. The world outside was in chaos, grappling with the great silence, but they would recover. The immediate threat was gone. So what did you mean? Liam asked, recalling her words in the desert. You said the Rayol fight is just getting started. Because the alien intelligence was never the only enemy, she replied, her expression hardening. It was a catalyst. The real, immediate enemy is human. It's Weskier, and it's everyone who was working with him. They haven't vanished. They still have their power, their influence, and their belief that they were right. And now, they have a vendetta. She brought up a news feed. Liam's face was still plastered everywhere, the branded image of a domestic terrorist. They control the narrative, Evelyn stated. We can't go to the authorities. We can't tell the world what really happened. No one would believe us. We are outlaws. And Weskier knows that one day, another signal might come. Or worse, he'll find a way to rebuild using the data he already has. The VLA was their first attempt, not their last. A cold realization settled over Liam. They hadn't won a war. They had survived a single, catastrophic battle. The enemy had retreated into the shadows, and now, so must they. So what do we do? He asked. We can't hide in this cabin forever. No, Evelyn agreed. We don't hide. We hunt. She gestured to her laptop. We have two weapons they don't know about. First, the Echo Network. It's still active, a ghost in the machine they can't see. We'll use it to watch them, to track their finances, to identify every member of their conspiracy. We'll turn their own weapon of surveillance against them. She paused, then opened a new, heavily encrypted file on her screen. And second, we have this. Thompson's insurance policy. They had never had time to fully analyze the secret archive Liam had used to blackmail Thompson. They had only used a snippet as proof. Now, they began to dig. It was more than just a backup of the alien blueprint. It was a treasure trove. Thompson, the meticulous corporate bureaucrat, had kept records of everything. There were encrypted logs of his communications with Weskier, financial records detailing the project's secret funding, and technical notes that filled in the gaps in their own knowledge. And then they found the folder labeled Oversight. Inside was a single video file. Evelyn double-clicked it. A recording of a video conference appeared on the screen. The image was clear. There were 4 people in the meeting. On one side was General Mark Weskier, his face a mask of cold intensity. Next to him was Robert Thompson, looking nervous. But it was the other 2 faces that made Liam's breath catch in his throat. One was a man he recognized instantly, Marcus Thorne, the billionaire CEO of a global social media empire, a man who preached about connecting the world while harvesting its data. The 4th face was a woman, a United States Senator named Katherine Vance, a rising star on the Senate Intelligence Committee. It was a conspiracy that reached from the military to corporate tech to the highest levels of the US government. My God, Liam whispered, staring at the screen. He looked at Evelyn, who was watching the video with an unnerving calm, as if she had expected nothing less. "I told you, Liam," she said, her voice a low, dangerous whisper as she looked at the faces of the powerful people who had been willing to sell out the world. The snake had more than one head. She paused, her eyes locking with his, the immensity of their new mission settling upon them. "And now, we have to cut them all off." The faces on the screen stared back at them, a silent council of the world's new secret masters. A general, a CEO, a senator, and a corporate vice president. The architects of humanity's quiet surrender. Liam felt a crushing weight settle on him, a sense of scale so immense it threatened to extinguish the last embers of his hope. "How can we possibly fight them, Evelyn?" he asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Weskier has the military's loyalty. Thorne controls the flow of information. Vance can write the laws to make us disappear. They are the system. We're just two people in a cabin." "Then we don't fight the system head-on," Evelyn replied, her gaze as sharp and focused as a scalpel. She closed the video file. "We fight the men. All systems, no matter how powerful, are run by people. And people have weaknesses. We can't attack the fortress, so we'll attack the generals inside." Their strategy session was born of desperation and fueled by a cold, calculated rage. They analyzed their targets. Weskier was the zealot, the true believer, too hardened and protected to be their first target. Senator Vance was insulated by the machinery of government. But Marcus Thorne, the tech billionaire, his entire empire was built on a carefully crafted illusion of public trust. His greatest strength was his greatest vulnerability. He would be their first target. "We can't just leak the video," Liam reasoned, already thinking like a strategist. "They'll use Thorne's own platform to call it a deepfake, digitally engineered by the terrorist Liam Carter. They control the narrative. Then we have to hijack it," Evelyn said, a dangerous plan forming in her eyes. "We won't just release one piece of evidence. We'll release all of it. Thompson's entire secret archive. The video, the emails with Weskier, the financial records, the technical specs, everything. And we'll use Thorne's own social media network as the delivery system. We'll turn his own weapon against him." The plan was audacious, a digital truth bomb, designed to shatter the conspiracy's control over the narrative in one decisive blow. For 2 days, they worked. It was the most intense, complex piece of work Liam had ever been a part of. He curated the data from Thompson's archive, packaging it into a single, irrefutable dossier, a mountain of evidence so large it couldn't be dismissed. Evelyn, meanwhile, used the full power of their echo network to craft the exploit. She wasn't breaking into Thorne's system. She was using the subtle backdoors and hardware-level exploits that the alien blueprint itself had been designed to use. She was weaponizing the enemy's own methodology. On the third night in the cabin, they were ready. The world outside had begun to stabilize from the great silence, a fragile, nervous calm returning. It was the perfect moment to unleash a new storm. "Ready?" Evelyn asked, her fingers poised over the keyboard. Liam looked at the screen, at the lines of code that represented their one and only shot. He nodded. "Do it." She pressed the key. For a moment, nothing happened. Then, on the live feed of the global internet they were monitoring, the first signs appeared. A trickle, then a flood. On Marcus Thorne's own social media platform, Connect, every user's feed was simultaneously hijacked. It wasn't a shutdown, it was a broadcast. Their dossier, their mountain of truth, was being pushed to billions of people at once, under the headline, "The Truth Behind the Great Silence." A message from the ghosts in the machine. They watched, transfixed, as the world reacted in real time. The initial confusion gave way to shock, then to outrage. The story was too big, the evidence too overwhelming, to be contained. News networks broke away from their regular programming. Rival tech companies began to amplify the story. Marcus Thorne's name, once a symbol of innovation, was now tied to a monstrous, global conspiracy. His company's stock value evaporated in minutes. The FBI, the SEC, and a dozen international agencies, forced by the sheer weight of public outcry, announced immediate, high-level investigations into Thorne, Weskier, and Senator Vance. The narrative was no longer theirs to control. It was shattered. Liam and Evelyn sat in their remote mountain cabin, bathed in the glow of the screen, watching the fire they had started burn across the globe. It was a victory, but it didn't feel triumphant. It was a grim, necessary act of demolition. "We started a fire," Liam said quietly, the immensity of their actions settling in. "We exposed a sickness," Evelyn replied, her eyes never leaving the screen. "The fire is the fever. It has to burn to fight the infection. We've shown the world that their technology was nearly turned into a cage. Now they have to decide what to do with that knowledge. She brought up a new screen. On it were the faces of their remaining targets. Senator Vance, her political career in ruins, but still dangerous. And General Mark Weskier, his face a mask of cold fury in a news photo. He was no longer a ghost. He was a cornered animal. And he would be more dangerous than ever. The war for the narrative was won. But the war in the shadows was far from over. Liam looked at the faces, then at Evelyn. He was no longer a data analyst. She was no longer just a reclusive genius. They were fugitives, outlaws, and in a world of lies, they were the unlikely guardians of a terrible truth. So what now? He asked. Evelyn minimized the window showing the world's chaos and maximized the image of General Weskier, his face filling the screen. Her expression was one of cold, unwavering resolve. Now, she said, we hunt.